Noon, fellow board members and Dr. Moore and associates.
Absolutely.
Call the meeting to order at 1 o'clock on the 25th of May, 2021. And I'm going to turn it over to our illustrious superintendent, who can take it from here.
Do appreciate this is a superintendent's workshop. We do have a lengthy agenda, but I think some of the items will move very smoothly. The first three items on the agenda, at the request of Dr. Jones, were placed, so I'll turn them over to her. Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Moore and school board members. Before I begin talking about this, please know that Dr. Moore and I have talked about this subject after our two last equity meetings. And one of the follow-ups to a previous equity meeting was placing an action item on the board to get the recommendations approved from the equity committee. And this board did it with a 5-0 vote, and I was very proud of that. In a little history, bear with me a little bit here, but the DSEG order has been with us for over 53 years, and I have been in the district for 41. As far as my experiences, as a principal for 17 years, I knew it was my responsibility to recommend African American teachers, and I was pretty successful there. I did not hire them because they were black. I hired them because they were well-qualified teachers. And then these teachers were mentors for our African American students and also role models for the students, all students. And because of the African American teachers, many students then had a mentor one-on-one with these students. And therefore, our discipline went down, graduation rate went up, scores went up, and I was very, very proud of all of that. We all know that academic achievement is probably the largest goal we have with the DSEG plan, closing the gap. Our graduation rate has increased, and we should be very, very proud of that, but we still have some work to do. Now, as academic achievement, when I was a principal, we had test scores come into us after the test, FSA and FCAT, and they would usually take weeks, and we would use that for scheduling next year. But now we have live data on Power BI and other scores much more quickly. We are data-driven with progress monitoring. It's very, very important because it helps our teachers. Now, with Power BI, we have never looked at it like we're now doing it with Dr. Moore. And we have impact reviews, which I have seen personally, and they're great feedback for our principals and teachers. So there's been a lot of movement with data and progress monitoring. But still, in 2021, after spending $1 million on partial unitary status, we now have a mandated court equity committee in our mediation with the NAACP. If you remember the transcripts from the October 2019 meeting, Mr. Brown said that we spent all that money instead of talking to them on the three components that we have had for a while: support staff, facilities, and administrative staff. And as a taxpayer, I was very upset with that expenditure. The new board came on in November 2020, and within 4 months, we adopted the recommendations given to us by a previous equity committee. It was given to them in October 2019. And as we all know this year, a little bit off with our COVID and students being here, we're going to have a baseline for our students. I believe about 58% of our African American students began the first quarter, and now I think we're up to around 78%. And now, with the wraparound that we're doing with our after-school programs, Ms. Emerson leading that, and I'm a little bit a part of that with MCAN, we have a lot going on and before school. So yes, we are moving forward. But when there are changes on the board, when the superintendent is gone, I believe we have to make a commitment through policy that we will continue to work on these recommendations for our African American students, and that it is sustainable. It will have some teeth. We have our African American Achievement Plan, which is part of our strategic plan. And when Dr. Moore came, the African American Plan was finally fine-tuned with progress monitoring and was data-driven. And it is being implemented in our schools because our principals are held accountable for this, and so is our so is our superintendent. So we're all for this. So why talk about this now? I think we have to show the NAACP, our equity committee, we are committed to this work going forward by setting it in policy. To me, this is a really good sign of faith from the school board. Not spending $1 million, but doing the work. And as I said at the last equity committee meeting, some DSEG plans reach unitary status and then they kind of just fall backwards. And I don't want that to happen as someone who's been living in this community for many, many years. So Dr. Moore, I know they'll have discussions with the board, but I'm recommending that you, the team you choose, along with Mr. Brown and the NAACP, and if you want to bring in other people, that's fine, if you both agree on that, to work on a policy, bring it back to the board so that these recommendations in this commitment is here to stay, that the work will continue. I know our district's up for this commitment from our teachers, our staff, our administrators, and district staff. And as all board members know, we are here for each and every student. Let's show good faith and put it in policy. Thank you.
So I'm sure, would like to have a response. Very well done, Dr. Jones.
Thanks.
Dr. Schiff.
Sure. 98% yes, yes, and yes.
What were the three?
98, 2.
Okay.
The only thing that I would like us to be able to have a discussion about, and you somewhat alluded to this in your comments, at some point, presumably, we will achieve unitary status, right? Presumably, that will happen at some point. When that happens, think about how I want to phrase this. Because of the structure of the litigation, the primary entity with whom we deal on these issues has been the NAACP. There are many voices in the African American community. Some agree, some don't agree, some there's a variety of voices with a variety of perspectives and opinions about how that work should move forward. And while I don't, as I said, 97 or 98%, I don't disagree. What I would like to do is be able to build a policy moving forward that is not that looks to the future, that looks to the time when, as you alluded, which is the point of this policy, we're beyond unitary status, we're beyond litigation. This is no longer driven by litigation, but is driven because it is a natural part of the work that we do, as it always should be, should have been, should continue to be. With that in mind, I'd like the policy to be inclusive, to in some way address, while you said that between the NAACP and the superintendent, we consider other people who may want to be involved or other entities, whatever that may be. I'd like that to be represented in the policy, that this is a broad-reaching initiative, that there are many both children affected by it, adults affected by it, groups who have a vested interest in it. And I'd like that to be as broad as possible. My concern is by no means that I disagree we should work with the NAACP, but I'd like to see the NAACP and a variety of other entities to whom this work is equally important.
Thank you, Dr. Schiff, that's good.
Mrs. Berenborg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what other entities you're referring to.
My concern, I don't have specific entities in mind, but I do know there are many entities, and just for example, the GYAC works a lot in that community, right? They do a lot of work in the community, they serve a lot of kids in the community, they host events for the community. I don't know enough about the sort of legal and corporate status of all of the entities to be able to name names at this point. But for example, there's many after-school programs. There are different groups in the Gifford and broader community who also might want to have a voice in how this work goes forward. So I'm not saying we should include this group or that group or another group. What I'm asking is that the policy read as broadly as possible to not simply limit our work to only being with and through the NAACP, but actually includes as well something broader than that.
Okay.
Mr. Gresta, Dr. Schiff brings up a good point. The plaintiff, the NAACP, and the school board are the two entities working with the DSEC plan. So if we move forward with the policy, would there be any issue bringing other people in just for the sustainability? Let's say we have unitary status and we're rolling.
This type of a post-unitary status policy would typically begin discussions with the parties involved in the litigation, but there is nothing that would prohibit the people having this discussion to include other perspectives, and there's nothing that would prohibit you from that forward thinking, what is our community going to look like in 10 years or 15 years? We want the policy to sustain that. So
Right,
there's
okay.
nothing wrong with that forward thinking, broad policy perspective.
Thank you.
The only thing that I would add, I mean, I think this is, the challenge that we face, and all elected bodies have the same challenge. Every time there's an election, you bring new people in,
Yeah, exactly.
who have perhaps a different perspective, or don't have the context that those who have been around for a while. And I think the idea of trying to figure out how to solidify that with policy makes a lot of sense. It's going to be a challenge, I think, to figure out the right wording, but the objective is
Right.
exactly right. And I think to Dr. Schiff's point, and we had this brief comment a few weeks ago, I understand that and I'm focused here on the achievement gap. Some of the other issues are more easily addressed, not easily addressed, but easily measured.
Easier, yeah.
Recruiting, discipline, transportation, those kinds of things. And I had this conversation just with Dr. Moore, not specifically. The thing that's bothered me since I've become more aware of public education in the state of Florida and specifically in Indian River County is that when you compare the state of Florida overall with other, depending on how you measure, which is a big question, we don't look so good. You know, somebody says we're 42nd, 35th of states out of 50 states. I don't know what any of that means. But we certainly should be better than we are. And then you bring it down to Indian River County, and the last statistic I saw is we ranked 37th out of 67 districts. Well, if you compare, if in fact we're below average statewide, and then we're below that average district-wide, when you put our kids up against the rest of the country, we don't look so good. And it's not just African-American kids, it's all kids. And I don't know how, to Dr. Schiff's point, how can we make it more exclusive, yet specifically have it come from the litigation that we're in the middle of? The real opportunity here for us and future school boards and for Dr. Moore and his team is to keep this focus on this for a long time. And I know when Dr. Moore was hired, and 3 of you hired him, but I was here for those interviews, you know, his goal was to have, instead of it saying, what you're saying when you drive into Indian River County, it says literary capital
Literacy capital of America.
of Florida, of America, of the world, whatever. Our math scores are really bad relative to that, and they've fallen even further behind. And it has all over the country, it's not just here. But my point is, we start from behind to begin with, relatively speaking. And somehow or another, and it falls on the superintendent and his staff, it falls on the principals, it falls on the teachers, and ultimately, from a policy standpoint, it falls upon us and future boards to somehow or another have in the policy higher standards than is just acceptable. To be in the top half or the top third, that's great, that's an improvement, but personally, I don't like being anywhere but at the top. And it doesn't have to be number 1, but it's got to be in the top. And if you think about, from a business standpoint, when you think about, if you measure the performance of money managers, for example, they all set standards. They use a benchmark. It can be the Dow Jones, it can be the S&P 500, and you're supposed to outperform your benchmark, which typically is the market. So part of this policy, I'd love to figure out if we can set a benchmark. And the goal is to be at or above that benchmark going forward. And it can be specific to math, it can be specific to STEAM, it can be specific to English, whatever it is. I guess what I'm saying is that if we can craft something like that, maybe it's got to be 2 policies, I don't know. But it's one thing to say that we want to continue this, but I think we have to figure out how to put some sort of standards in there to measure whether in fact we are performing as a district, or the specifics of math, language, reading, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the only thing that I would throw in there, not making it any easier, and it's not going to, but I think GYAC, Boys and Girls Club, they run a great after-school program. I understand that in the reorganization, this 8th period that's been freed up or created, I don't know whether it's freed up or created for the teachers, great opportunity to continue to have focus, and maybe that becomes one of the benchmarks, to have focus on particularly math, because the kids are so far behind. So that's really what I just like to add since you teed this up. Yes, Ms. Rosario.
Thank you. We already have benchmarks. The superintendent has already prepared and presented those benchmarks in the form of baseline data to us. He also provides us with updates on the baseline data. As of July of 2020, he presented with us targets for up until 2025 in the areas of academic success, equity, culture, and climate, target 25, and there are several other pages that go on and on and on with his targets using a baseline data, and then there is target up until 2021, and then there's a target to 2025. I know that there are other benchmarks that have been created and presented that right now I could not pull up in front of me immediately. Dr. Moore can speak specifically to where they are located, but I know that he's already done that work, so we're there already, which is a good thing. How those data and benchmarks can be fine-tuned, I believe is something ongoing as we get our results, obviously, from the FSA testing this year, at the end of this year, and some of the other baselines or benchmarks, rather, that we are waiting for the results to come in. I'm sure that's going to be presented to us, I believe, in July, when Dr. Moore gives us his end-year evaluation, or we give him the end-year evaluation, and that's a conversation between board members and the superintendent. I think this comes from a really a heartful place. I can hear Dr. Jones wanting to do the right thing, and I know that we all want to do the right thing with a sustainability policy. My concern is that I think that we might be putting the cart before the horse just a little too soon. I don't know if right now is the right time to do this. I do believe that something should be done, but I'm not so sure that creating a policy right now would be the timely thing to do. And here's what I mean about that. The commitment is there by all of us. We already have this commitment to do this work in our strategic plan. And I think that we're forgetting that our strategic plan is supposed to guide every single decision that we make. Every decision in terms of budget, every decision in terms of classroom management, every decision down to the paperwork that is submitted, from parents to admit their children into school, and everything up until graduation. Our strategic plan is the plan that we should be using, and that is to be used for every decision. And so our efforts to do the work of equity and culture, it's already in there. So we have it, and I think that we often forget because we may not have it in front of us, or it's not, an item that we're referencing immediately, but everybody should have it in front of them at all times, to be honest with you. It's kind of the driving force of the district. So here's what I think about that. Why I think that it's a little too soon is because we're right in the middle of mediation. We don't know what may or may not come out of mediation. We also don't know what may or may not happen between now and the end of the school year. I mean, between now and the end of December, going into this annual year, just before requesting unitary status. We don't know the steps that we would be making, hopefully great steps in the direction of progress. And I mention all of this because if we're going to craft policy, I think it's important for us to reflect on where we are at the time of crafting policy. Right now, because we have the commitment already in our strategic plan, in our African American Achievement Plan, we have it in our probably 5 other different plan in the targets that I just mentioned. Crafting a policy now, not knowing where we will be in October, November, or December, or just prior to requesting unitary status, might not be beneficial to us because we're probably going to be here later revising the policy. I'd like, if we were to create a policy, to know where exactly we are just before entering into the courtroom and asking for full unitary status. I'd like us to then think of an opportunity to, at that point, say in good faith, because we don't know what the NAACP will think at that time. The NAACP may think that we're not in the place of going for full unitary status. But at that time, if we were to craft policy, we might, in good faith, tell them, look, we are going to go for full unitary status, but here's our commitment to you at that point. The other thing is my concern with being inclusive without other agencies or other entities crafting our policy. That worries me, because then when do we stop? We have been the elected officials to craft the policy for the school district. If we want to include other people in the crafting of a policy, then why not later on consider a proclamation of good faith to the commitment of this work? That's something a little different that I think maybe we can think of, later on. I just don't believe that now is the right time.
Dr. Jones.
Well, before I make a statement, I'd like to hear from Dr. Moore what he would envision this to look like.
So there are a number of districts that, am I on here? Yes. There are a number of districts that have sustainability policies following unitary status. I think the creation of a policy drives the work of the superintendent. It exceeds any one particular superintendent. It exceeds any particular school board member. So it becomes the driving force of the public school system. Creating a sustainable plan really to ensure, as Dr. Jones mentioned, the research is clear. It's not an opinion. Very typical when a district obtains unitary status, the movement that allowed them to attain that status quickly goes back to where it was prior to the attainment. That's just a simple fact. I think we need to create a policy prior to obtaining unitary status. I think unitary status is something that shouldn't be a debate or discourse or disagreement. I think in the appropriate situation, the school district of Indian River County says, we deserve unitary status. The NAACP says, we deserve unitary status. And I say we, not the district, the entire community. Members of the community say, yes, we deserve unitary status. And I think we've taken tremendous strides forward in obtaining that work, but by no means do I think that we are done. And when we attain unitary status, by no means do I think we will be done. So working with the NAACP, as School Board Attorney mentioned, they are the plaintiffs in the case. Creating a policy, at the end of the day, the policy would come through my office to this board for review. and working with, or opening the doors, Dr. Schiff, to extend conversation on the input, on the creation of a policy. I think that's something that we can work with the NAACP to say, what does that look like? And I do have a question on that. If it is the creation of the policy, or is it within the policy itself to continue to grow the conversation on the, so it's just not the NAACP in the school district after we attain unitary status. So if it is the creation of the policy, I do think we could work with the NAACP and say, let's not do this in isolation, but let's do this in partnership and collectively agree upon individuals who could sit at the table. I haven't had that conversation with the NAACP, but I think that is reasonable that we come to agreement on the case that we are within. And then the creation of the policy, I'm equally comfortable it is to ensure that we create a policy that really takes unitary status and blows it out for across the entire system in terms of what we're doing, which include multiple voices. I agree that policy should support that understanding.
I just want to add to that, thank you for all the comments. Personally, I don't think this is too early. I think it's about 40 years too late. Because let's say it takes us 4 more years to get unitary status, or we get it next year. That doesn't mean that we're not going to keep working on the work, which is what our teachers and administrators, support staff, everybody does on a daily basis. And I really appreciate Dr. Schiff saying bringing in other people. I think that'd be great because it's a community. It's a community, and it's also a DSEG order we've dealt with for many years. But that waiting until unitary status, to me, does not make a commitment. And I think something like this is something that we just must move forward with. Again, we spent money. Where are we? We're back in mediation. We're back at having court issues. And I just want to move forward. And it's not, to me, it's not even about the unitary status. To me, it's about what are we doing for these kids every day, every single day. And and they have faith that we want to make it happen.
Go ahead, Dr. Schiff.
So I'm a little confused. I've heard sustainability policy, I've heard unitary status, I've heard benchmarks, I've heard strategic plan, I've heard sustainability. And I'm getting a little confused in what's the purpose of this. And so what I'd like to hear is like the elevator speech. Is the 30-second elevator speech what you envision this saying or writing or codifying, because I actually agree with Mrs. Rosario. I think the benchmarks are in a different place, and I think that that's important, but I think that occurs somewhere else. I think policy is not just about the specific measures, but it's creating a commitment, and that commitment is being codified. That's what I hear. So I want to be really clear in this, exactly how you envision this. Obviously, you don't have the language right now. Obviously, that has to go through a variety of steps.
Yes.
But what's kind of the short version, the elevator speech about what this says and codifies so that I'm really clear about it?
So as I understand it and review it, strategic plan created annually by the superintendent and staff, approved by the board. The African American Achievement Plan, once we attain unitary status, that's part of the joint plan, can go to the wayside, goes away. Equity Committee, after 3 years of attaining unitary status, goes away, can go to the wayside. This looks at the specific sections that we had to address to obtain unitary status and creates policymaking to ensure within each of those specific areas we continue to grow in those specific areas. So it's looking at the sections within the joint plan, within the areas that we need to address to obtain unitary status, in creating policy to ensure or directs the superintendent that there's policy in place, that those specific areas continue to have a focus in on them. There's a structure within the organization to continue to look at those specific areas. So that would be, ding, ding, elevator door opening.
That was a long elevator speech.
Right. I lived on the 31st floor, so.
So to be clear, first off, to be clear, the African American Achievement Plan is driven by the joint order. I thought it was driven by somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm a little.
I thought that was driven, I thought it was driven by something else, that the joint plan, the equity committee, all of that, yes, is driven by the litigation. The African American Achievement Plan, I don't believe necessarily goes away. I think that's down to us. That's one thing. But two, so what I hear you saying, and it is part of the joint plan, the African American Achievement Report is part of the joint plan. We did not have an African American Achievement Report before the joint plan, is that true?
No, there is an African American Achievement Plan.
Right, because if it's driven by the joint plan, then it wasn't in existence prior to 2018. Right. We've had that for a long time. It's driven,
Right, it's,
right, but we've had it for a long time. It became a part of the joint plan,
Yes.
but was not driven by nor mandated by the joint plan, right?
yes.
No,
All right,
it is
let me
Now
have
it
the lawyer respond, please.
In 1994, it was part of the joint plan. So it's been a part of the joint plan for many years. It was reinserted in the 2018 joint plan. It wasn't done away with, it was reinserted. So it has been in place for a long time, that requirement.
So is it true then that if we achieve unitary status, then the African American Achievement Plan goes away?
Shouldn't.
The 2018 joint plan has a requirement in it for an African American Achievement Plan each year to be approved by the board. Once the 2018 joint plan goes away or we attain unitary status, then the obligations under that joint plan go away. But how the superintendent and this board determines to operate the district, you can certainly do something else, something similar, something.
Right, so that then is embedded in, that's the reason for a sustainability policy, not just that, but that's part of it. So the notion of the sustainability policy is to say, when we achieve unitary status and these obligations go away, we're still committed to doing this work. We will ongoingly be committed to doing this work. We will direct the superintendent to do this work, and that may occur through a variety of things like an equity committee, a community panel, for lack of a better word, the African American Achievement Report, and that would be built into the sustainability policy. Am I correct?
Yes. Equally tall building, but yes.
Yes.
Say what?
Equally tall building, but.
No,
All right,
23rd floor maybe.
Dr. Jones?
Yes, and that was very well said, Dr. Schiff. And at the last two equity meetings, too, we talked about the sustainability, because there was a few questions and dialogue about that, where are we going to go? And again, when we get unitary status, absolutely wonderful, but this will help us sustain in policy, because unless it is in policy specifically, it has been known to just kind of go by the wayside. And I want our community to know whether or not we're federally mandated to do this, we know it's the right thing to do. For, like I said, 53 years, here we are. We've got to make a commitment.
I think in corporate terms, because that's the world that I lived in for a lot of years. A strategic plan is a living, breathing document. And a good strategic plan, first of all, it's never more than 3 years. You can forget about the out years because the world changes every year, if not sooner. And certainly the world has changed because of COVID. So I think reference in a policy to the requirement there be a strategic plan that's updated appropriately. A strategic plan should be reviewed every year, and the out years should be adjusted according to the environment you find yourself in. Technology alone almost forces you to change your strategic plan. And it certainly forces you to change the measurement standards you use in order to determine whether, in fact, you're making progress. So I think you've both said sort of the same way. A policy, if you're a board of directors of a public company, you're going to approve a strategic plan, but you're also going to have a policy and call it the bylaws. You're going to have a policy basically that requires you to have a strategic plan. And you can be as specific subsets, there can be subset, there can be an African-American component to a strategic plan. You're gonna have financial measurements, because a strategic plan that you can't afford isn't worth the paper it's written on. So it's gotta be realistic from a financial standpoint. All of those things can be incorporated into a policy without the specificity that ties you to any one particular thing, because the world's gonna keep changing. Let's hope. Ms. Rosario.
I'm kind of shocked to hear that the African American Achievement Plan and would just go away, and some of the other things that you just mentioned after we go for unitary status. That has never been a part of any discussion that we have had, not
Could
public
go
and
away,
not
not
even
would go away. Could. Difference.
could or would, either way, that has never been a discussion, neither private or public. So that's very, it's very shocking to me to hear that. The commitment, minus the proposal for a policy, has always been to continue the work even post-unitary status. And in our 2018 joint plan, there is even a clause or a caveat or an agreement in there that even if at the end of the 3-year period, the parties agree that the school district is entitled to the declaration of unitary status in some or all remaining areas, the equity committee, as part of the work, will continue to exist and monitor equity issues for at least 2 additional years, i.e. the equity committee will exist for a minimum of 5 years. Now, I know that only talks specifically to equity committee, but to the work of equity, it still continues post-unitary status, at least by this joint plan for the next 2 years following. So I'm really surprised to hear that that was even mentioned, because the work should
I
not
think
say go away, could
I
go
don't think,
away.
the potential for it to go away is 100% factual. My desire, or any of these board members' desire for that to go away, absolutely isn't the intent. But the strongest, most powerful move a board can take to protect that shock that you have right now is the creation of a policy that says the desire, making an assumption that that good work would continue isn't the best course of action to take. Saying, let's solidify it in policy. Policy is the driving factor of a school system that ensures the work continues. And there's many elements that would, you're right, need to continue on and ultimately grow beyond and across the entire district that need to be solidified through policy.
The last thing that I was going to mention, you mentioned that there was another, or the African American Achievement Plan was in place before. There's 2 different African American Achievement Plans. There's or African American Achievement Report. There's a African American Achievement Report that is where data is collected and submitted to the DOE annually. And then we have our African American Achievement Plan, which was created, for the joint plan. So maybe that's where we're getting confused. There are 2 different, because for years, for the last 3, I got confused on both of them. But there are 2 different reports with the same name, believe it or not.
So, just for a level of clarity through the chair, there is a report that all 67 districts are required to complete. It's one of those fill-in-the-blank reports, requires board approval. We bring it to the board each year. It's very straightforward in terms of a number-driven approach. African American Achievement Plan, established in 1994, renewed in 2018, first approved year before last, when that was one of the first actions I took, was to create that specific plan.
Yes, ma'am.
When I first read this item on here, I will say I had a conversation with you, and the first thing I said is, what a great idea, thank you. The reason why I said that is because I have seen where, first of all, we've been through this for so many years, and the worst thing that could happen is we achieve status, and then something falls by the wayside and we wind up back in court like some other districts are going through. Right. And I don't think any of us want to see that. I don't think now is the time to sit here and talk about all the details. I think now is the time just to make a decision on what's the best timing for when to create this policy, because I heard timing is an issue. And I think at that point, when it comes back to us, is when we can say, okay, is there an African Achievement Plan part of this? Is, you know, it related to the strategic plan? That's when we, I think, really pick apart what we think needs to be in there. I think right now we're putting the cart literally in front of the horse. So I think we need to just decide on timing and whether or not to go
Well,
forward with this.
Yeah, I think the issue is, are we in favor of going forward with it? I'm hearing,
That's part of what I just said.
I'm hearing most of us are with some objections. So either we come to consensus to go forward with it, and obviously it'll come back before the board with specific language, or the board says not to go forward with it, but that's not what I'm hearing. So I agree with you. I think it, for the most part, there's agreement to go forward with it. We see the merit of it. Let's decide that, and let's charge our superintendent and school board attorney with bringing back language.
Ms. Rosario?
Dr. Moore, you have a question for you. You mentioned earlier that other districts have created policy after attaining unitary status. What were the reasons for creating policy after obtaining unitary status versus before?
Through the chair, I can't say at what point in their obtainment of unitary status it was created. Only did a cross-check to see, are there similar policies that we could use as a starting point as we created them. So completing it before or after, I think completing it before is the appropriate process, with enough lead time to really engage in the dialogue about what is embedded and captured within the particular policy. So,
I'm sorry if I can add to that. I think that's also part of the point of it, is to, as Dr. Jones was mentioning, to put it in place before we achieve unitary status to demonstrate we're committed to the work irrespective of whether we've got unitary status or not. The point is the work, not the legal charge to do so.
correct.
I'll agree with that.
Correct.
Well said.
Thank you.
Very well said.
Okay.
I have my
Dr. Moore?
Not my item, but I think as written, I think it allows us to do that work. It does provide a 3-month window. I think it comes back August 10th. So as we engage in the work, if I need additional time, then I would let the board know.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, you said you're going to bring back language on August 10th?
August 10th is to bring back for your review, which I would probably bring it to a workshop saying this is the progress that we've made regarding the policy. It would include something regarding each of the sections of the plan. It would include how we would monitor and review and ensure that we're continuing to grow each of those specific areas. It would include something when we're not continuing to grow, when we identify a deficiency, what the appropriate course of action would be by the superintendent to get back to where it was when it begins to fall. So a check and balance policy, basically.
And just to clarify, I assume the reason that you're suggesting a almost 3-month window is to check policy in other districts, to check legal status, to make sure, you know, what's included in it, you know, all of those different things that you mentioned is why you envision it would take 3 months to do that?
And opening schools as well, and summer PD,
Well,
and
you know,
everything,
and
yes.
the assorted other things, obviously, that we need to
I
do.
would assume meeting with the NAACP would be one of those.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in a big hurry in terms, I mean, if it takes 4 months, you know, you're talking about a broad policy that will satisfy the future, not knowing what lies before us between now and whenever the future is. So
Yeah.
I think as long as it's concise and can identify, you know, specifics to the extent possible, if it takes a little longer and you need to have a few more meetings, we're going to be here for a while. Hopefully not today, but we're at least here till the next election. You're stuck with all of us, so.
I'm happy. All right. Dr. Jones, the next item is yours as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to, this is really my personal opinion on agendas and being a first-time board member. Obviously, we have 2 meetings a month, and a lot of time goes into preparing the agenda for those meetings. It's in our policy to get the agenda published on our website 7 days ahead of time. And we should, it's the right thing to do, so our constituents know what we're talking about or voting on. Dr. Moore talks about transparency all the time. And each board member is giving detailed information on every consent item and action item. I study it thoroughly, and if my questions are not answered, I will pull it from consent, but I need that background information beforehand to research every item. And just for the public to know, I know board members have said this before, but each board member meets with the superintendent once a week in cabinet to get our questions answered and concerns expressed, and also sometimes debate. And there are phone calls between those meetings if we need to add to the agenda. We can do so with no problem if we get it on time, never an issue there for adding something to an agenda. Now, in policy, after the agenda has been made available, change should be only for good cause as determined by the person designated to preside and stated in the record. And I know special meetings require 48 hours ahead of the meeting. An additional item can be added first with approving the addition with the orders of the day and then adding the item if it is for good cause. Now, I know we'll probably discuss this and talk about it, but to me, good cause is somewhat of an emergency. We had those during hurricanes when I was principal. We had to do memorandums of understanding, get things out, so we just had to kind of move forward with that. In other words, we couldn't wait 2 weeks to the next meeting. And I've seen emergency action items or when it needed to happen. That is why we have good cause. I just didn't think it was fair to everyone listening to parents in the boardroom only. I received several phone calls, emails, texts, grocery store stops, where they said, I didn't know you were going to vote on this. I'm sending my child because you do require masks. So, okay, that's why I said I think we have to have good cause. 2 actions items were added last time, optional mask and meeting room setup. In my professional opinion, not for good cause or an emergency, and I voted against both. Children and staff are wearing masks through the end of the year and following the CDC protocols now, inside and outside, and I think we should honor that. The superintendent and his cabinet run the district and should be the one sharing with each of us immediately when he sees we need to add something for good cause and emergency. And that is my expectation of Dr. Moore. You and your staff have the big picture, and you know the details. Obviously, board members must work together to have a meeting when the agenda has been published in the appropriate amount of time and not bring up action on it after the meeting has started unless it truly is an emergency. We were voted into this office by our constituents, and we need to listen to all sides before deciding, not just those who are the loudest. I truly believe, in trying to learn every day with FSBA, that we must be procedural, develop protocols, and do the business in a professional manner. As they have said to us many times, FSBA, we set the policy, and the superintendent and staff run the day-to-day. I think we have a very important job. Responsibility of the education of these students lies with the board. We need to run the agenda as published and listen to all constituents. We need to be ready to vote by reading all the information that's given to us. So when an action item is added after the agenda has been published, I will be asking how this is for good cause and whether it needs to happen. That's my opinion.
May I?
Mrs. Barrenborn.
So are you asking then for board members not to be able to add items?
Absolutely not. An emergency or good cause, absolutely you can.
Okay, so I would consider a good cause when the governor makes a statement such as he did before our last meeting. I think that's a good cause for discussion at a board meeting.
What was that, Terry?
He made a
order.
discussion about
Okay,
immediately
executive
removing
order. Okay,
masks.
yeah.
So I
Okay.
think that that's a reasonable request for a board member to bring it forward and for us to discuss at a board meeting. I thought that, even though it did surprise me and even though it did come up the way it did, and I don't know if you remember that I did amend it that after Ms. Rosario brought it up, but I think that I'm not going to say, because you directly made that statement, so I'm not going to say that that wasn't appropriate to bring up because the governor had made a statement before that. So I did understand why a board member brought that up.
Okay. Maybe we could hear the definition of good cause,
Yeah.
what everybody thinks about it.
Ms. Rosario?
Thank you. Well, there are legal definitions for good cause, which I'm sure Suzanne can clarify for us. On many FSBA conferences, in many workshops with them, they are very clear that the agenda is the superintendent's up until it is posted. Between the time of posting, which should be 7 days prior to the meeting, up until, I think it's the meeting, up until the meeting, it then becomes a joint agenda between superintendent and the board chair. At the meeting, it becomes the board's agenda. So when we are in a meeting, it is no longer the superintendent's agenda. It belongs to all 5 board members. That is why if there's something that a board member wants to add during the consent approval, anybody can do that, and then we vote on it. So you vote on adding something to the agenda. So for example, if Mrs. Barenboim or anybody wanted to add something and then you did not want that particular item to be added to an action item or a discussion item or something else, then you can vote and say no. And the agenda moves forward as such. So I think there were some things that you mentioned in there that you may not have understood the
No, I
full.
understood.
Okay, because you didn't mention any of that. He does not own it, sorry. The superintendent doesn't own or have the agenda the night of the meeting. So that's with regard to agendas. But what I did print, and I'd love to share it with you all, are there's the top page, sorry, let me turn it. I'm going to give one to the superintendent and whomever else wants a copy. The top one is a statute for public officers. Thank you. Here's 3. I have 3. The top one is just the statute for public officers with regard to meetings, hearings, and workshops. But there are, and I'm glad that you did bring up this agenda item, though not for the purpose of what you are discussing, but for us to review agendas in general when items are presented to us, when backup is posted online. I think that's all important for us to discuss as well with regard to agendas, because I've had some concerns with that, receiving things last minute, receiving items on Friday for the Tuesday meeting, or even items being placed on there on Monday. They may be for good cause, but I think that we should establish an understanding that everything should be done 7 days prior. All of the backup, everything should be 7 days prior to avoid, which was the prior practice, to avoid the last minute hustle of what has been updated. Because when we receive the updated notice, I don't ever get to know what was actually updated. So I'm scrolling through the agenda trying to figure out what was it, you know. So those are the kinds of things that I think that this might be a good opportunity for us to discuss. And that's part of some of the items that I included for you. So the first one is a general meetings, hearings, and workshops statute. The next one is our policy notice of meetings. We have a policy 0164 with regard to notice of meetings and postings on the district website and so on and so forth. You can take a look at that. The next one I included, which I really like, is St. Lucie County's board meeting policy. It is code 2.22. This is a really nice policy. If you look at it, it's really very comprehensive in one page. We often have policies that are like 20 different, 20 different policies all talking about the same thing when we can just narrow it all down to one. And I kind of like the way that St. Lucie created theirs here on school board governance and organization. Here you'll see how school board meetings are run. You'll see the rules of order. You'll see the meeting agenda, when items are placed on there, how it's run. You will see public participation at school board meetings. You will see scheduled speakers. It's kind of all encompassing quorum, voting, and of course, disruptive behavior. So I thought that these might be good supplemental material for you all to take a look at as we start to look at what our agendas should look like receiving the agenda, when we should receive it, and all of those items.
May I?
Dr. Schiff?
Couple things. I don't disagree at all, Dr. Jones. I think that, I too thought that we were going to talk about the 7 days versus the occasional. Sometimes things are put on Friday afternoon. Often those are for good cause because they're personnel decisions. So, Mrs. Rosario, when something is updated, I always know what's updated because our incredibly efficient and well-organized executive assistant always says updated in
Yes.
front of the item.
But
So
you-
I can look right there where it's updated.
Right.
And she says the date it's been updated.
And the color.
So well, on the board docs, it doesn't show color, but it does show emboldened. But I can usually find that, so I know what to look for when it's been updated, and I know when she sends me a notice that means go look, because something's been updated and it'll say that. But to Dr. Jones's point, I hear two different things here. Well, to everybody's point. There's a difference between when something is put on the agenda for action and when something is put on for discussion. When something's put on for discussion, because something has occurred that we didn't anticipate, it's completely appropriate for us to discuss it because we don't have any other time to do that. There are innumerable things that come up before this board that I really wish we could hash out beforehand and we can have some discussion about, but we can't. So there are times, like an executive order, when it's completely appropriate to have that conversation here. When we take a vote, however, without that preparation, I agree with Dr. Jones that that can have unintended consequences. For example, because we didn't vet the policy, I too received numerous communications about citizen input. Because when we go back to normal, that means people can't email citizen input anymore. That means people have to show up. As a result of which, we have a lot of people planning to show up tonight because we didn't vet it before we voted on it. And that concerns me because that has implications too. So irrespective of, in addition to noticing it and letting people know what we're voting on, if we haven't had the conversations, if we haven't discussed it with the superintendent, if we haven't discussed it with our board attorney, we may wind up voting for things like I think we did without a full understanding of the implications of that vote. And that's what I hear Dr. Jones alluding to. That's my interpretation. That may or may not be her words or her agreement. So I think there's a difference. And when there is something that comes up, nothing precludes us from having special meetings. We've done it in the past. It's hard to organize sometimes because we all have conflicting schedules. But if there's something that has to be voted on that has implications like, as Dr. Moore said at the last meeting, teachers went home under one policy and he was concerned about having them come back under a different one at 8 o'clock the next morning, I have real concern about that, and I agree. And I do think we need to have more considered and thoughtful discussions when we're making policy decisions that affect 15,000 students and 2,000 employees. And I don't think any of us takes that lightly. And I think we need to be really conscious and conscientious about how we do that. So I don't at all disagree with how things have to be noticed, and I do know that sometimes things have to be put on at a later date because for a variety of good reasons, they weren't ready by Tuesday. They needed legal opinion. They needed direction from the state. We are protecting personnel. There's any number of reasons that can happen. But for broad policy decisions, yeah, I think we need to do that in advance.
So can I ask a question here for my benefit? If an item is introduced by a board member, it's one thing to add it to discussion, which I presume is not a problem because we've done that more than once for sure. But to be able to be asked to vote on something when it's introduced that evening, that's my question. And that's what we did. And there's always unintended consequences, not always, but often. And in hindsight, you might have been a little more specific or included this or made an exception to that. So I would like to know from not just the opinions we all may have, but, maybe you, Ms. DeAgresta, whether or not you can actually vote, with the exception of the words that Dr. Jones just used, what'd you use, for cause or?
Good cause.
For good cause. And how do you define that? Is there something to guide us rather than us having our own conclusions as to what that means and what we're able or not able to do?
Absolutely. Your policy with regard to agendas allows board members to add items to an agenda
Right?
once the meeting is called to order. If the board determines they wish to operate differently, and some boards have and some boards haven't, you can change that language and remove the ability to add an action item to an agenda. In prior years, this is going back many years, that was the policy. And then over time, it was revised at the request of board members to allow board members to add action items. Historically, and this was some years ago, the policy was worded to allow board members to add anything to the discussion section, and then after that discussion, if further discussion or action was needed, it would be put on a subsequent board meeting agenda for action. But that language was changed over time, and
Okay.
which leads us to where we are today.
Okay.
Mr. Gresta, do you remember when that was changed?
I'm not going to be able to give you the year, but I recall a discussion amongst board members, and I know Mr. Searcy was a part of that discussion of being able to add items to an agenda that board members felt needed to be acted on the night of the meeting. I'm not going to be able to give you a date, I'm sorry, but that's...
Sometime within the 4 years that Mr. Searcy
Right,
was on the board.
and there may have been discussions prior to him being on the school board as well, but that's the discussion that I remember leading to some language changes.
That's close enough, thank you.
Mr. Gresta, in our policy, it says the order of business may be altered and items added at any meeting by a majority vote of the members present. So do we have to do a vote before we even add it, other than the orders of the day?
That's your orders of the day. At the orders of the day, you alter the arrangement, you move some things from consent to action, or you might rearrange where a presentation is. And if a board member wishes to add something, which the language allows, that vote on the orders of the day approves all of those changes. If for some reason the board wants to bifurcate that and take individual votes, oh, I want to move consent A to action, well, let's take a motion and vote. I want to move consent D to action, you could bifurcate each one of those, or you can take it as a group.
And we've done that. We have removed consent items
Yes, sir.
to discuss individually.
Yes, sir.
And then we discuss and vote.
Right.
And, that could very likely happen tonight. Can happen at any meeting. And then the rearranging of the agenda for whatever the reason is, again, that's under the orders of the day.
Yes.
And we can rearrange the agenda with the approval of the majority of the board
Yes.
for whatever the reasons may be, out of courtesy to someone who's, going to make a presentation and you want to move them up front so they don't have to, or for whatever other reason may be appropriate.
I guess my basic premise here is, unless it is an emergency or good cause, I want to have the information needed to make a vote, as we do with our consent and action items, and I want to know that our constituents know we're voting. That's it.
And I think what the issue that Dr. Schiff raised about email specifically, because I can remember after the fact, I think I asked either Ms. Esplin or Dr. Moore, what does this really mean? Does this mean we go back and sit up there? Which is one thing for sure, does it mean rearranging the deck chairs here? Hopefully not on the Titanic. But specifically, what about emails?
And to that point, specifically, in seconding what Dr. Jones is saying, we shouldn't be voting on something if we don't know exactly what it means. We just shouldn't. If we don't know if we have to go back afterwards and say, what did we just vote on? We shouldn't be voting on it, in my opinion.
But that's what discussion is for.
Correct, at discussion,
Right.
not at action, right? But if there is,
But you can
So
discuss
one-
during action.
yeah. So we can do that, but clearly afterwards, there were implications of that to which Mr. Barefoot is alluding that we weren't clear on and that had implications for subsequent meetings. And I'm sure the superintendent, as he did with me, had individual conversations with all of you about what that meant for citizen input in particular. It had other implications for how we're arranged in the room, how we sit with each other, various other, what's going to happen in this room tonight when we all know a lot of people are planning to show up, where they're going to be, how they're going to be arranged, how security is going to be managed, yada, yada, all of those things. But we took a vote on something, and pardon me, Mr. Barefoot, because you just said that, so I'm going to reiterate, that our board chair had to then go back and say, okay, what are the implications of this? I think that's a dangerous precedent, personally. I agree with Dr. Jones on this. I think that's real, I agree. I have concerns about that.
Well, and as I recall, just using the email piece, and this was put in place, I believe it was put in place when COVID came along. But there's plenty of people who find it inconvenient to have to come here at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night, even though
I'd say
you'd like them
impossible,
to.
not only inconvenient, impossible.
And personally, I think having, particularly people seem to have, there's a few exceptions, but people seem to have gotten used to how to fill out the form and the whole deal that I think personally think we should put that back in and allow it. It's just, I just think more people have an opportunity to speak. It's less of an inconvenience, and it's no more of an inconvenience to us have someone speaking in person or having Kristen or somebody else reading an email. That's just my point of
Yeah.
opinion.
You know, I know, like, our email addresses are out there. People email us all the time about things. They call us, they stop us in the grocery store. I was stopped twice this week. So, you know, they have the ability to talk to us many different ways. The question here is whether or not they want to be on camera or have their comments made publicly for the camera. I guess that's what we're asking, right? Because they can still, and they do, send us those same emails. So I'm getting all those emails. I'm reading all those emails.
But how that information comes, I may get emails you don't get, you may get emails I don't get. How those are heard by the public, how they add to or detract from a conversation. That doesn't happen. I have no idea what anybody said to you in a supermarket, and I don't necessarily need to. It may not be for me. But when somebody comes here or writes an email to be read into the record, it's because they feel strongly enough about something that they want to make a public statement.
And if that's the case, then, and I agree with you, we should allow that communication to still continue, because that's what we want. We want
we do.
citizens to have the right to have input.
Of course we do.
We're not going to close down input and everything else.
And that's what we inadvertently did.
I think what it gets away from, though, is when it becomes, and I've seen it in our county happen, I'm not talking about recently, I'm talking about years ago, where people were running for an office for other thing, and then they would come to a school board meeting and speak to the camera about whatever it was, and it had nothing to do with school board. So it got away from people, and I think that's why some districts changed some things, because I think people were using it for the wrong reasons. If it's about the business of the board and about students and about what's happening with our schools, yeah, we want to absolutely hear, and I think we need to. And it needs to be timely for them.
I agree, and I would add to that, you know, that speaks to what I think is Dr. Jones's next item, which is
Civility.
which is limitedly, that's not really a word, civility, but it also speaks to broader issues of relevance and respect and specificity, which are not necessarily in civility, but certainly could be. And to that, I agree, and I think that's our next item, where we could expand that item from civility to also include relevance.
Dr. Moore, having, served for many years down in Miami-Dade and now here, and never having to deal with a pandemic, which allowing email certainly was appropriate for the times. Not to put you on the spot, but if you had all the votes or a recommendation, Or if you don't choose to have a point of view, what's your point of view on this topic about allowing or not allowing emails?
So in terms of the overall dialogue, I think first and foremost, if the superintendent of schools isn't bringing an action item around any emergency, then he or she is doing something wrong. And if it's up to the board to bring the item, there's a problem. So in terms of ensuring that the staff who works for the superintendent is ensuring documentation is being provided, a vote that drastically shifts the overall operation of the organization is the responsibility of the superintendent. And if it's an emergency, and things do happen, an executive order that says A, B, C, or D that needs to be acted on before we come back together a second time, that would be something in which we would vote upon. If we were to take up an initiative for a bill that was signed in Tallahassee and the board wanted to take a stance, that should be something that we should be able to, from staff's perspective, prepare. In terms of the public comment, it's just relatively straightforward. I think the opportunity to engage and access the community is done in a very, very efficient and effective way. And the opportunity to connect to each of you is something that's rightly, the community has access to its board members. We do not have a policy that allows us to put in emails. It was a modification to policy under the executive order. Therefore, we went back to normal, and then if someone, wants to come in, they come in and speak.
So did you answer the part about whether or not you're okay with the emails?
I mean, I'm
going
okay
forward?
with the structure as it is. And I think at the front of this work is the opportunity for the elected officials, the board members, to have a deep understanding as to where the community believes, but ultimately makes decisions based on what they believe is in the best interest of the entire community. And I think, this is a policy that was probably written 100 years ago, where, there was no opportunity to email. There was no, you had to put a stamp on a piece of paper and send it in. I am not concerned that you don't have access to your constituents and have a deep understanding as to how they feel on all areas of all issues. So conducting the business of the board in a timely and relevant way that ensures that we're all awake, we're all clearly of mind in making decisions and going through the work of the board needs to be a priority for the board.
So let me ask a question of my colleagues. We all get these emails, and we made it very simple because now they only have to check one box, not 5. Is it appropriate for one of us on a particular email to say, Mary Smith or Tom Jones sent an email, or we all received an email, and then to have it brought forward for discussion? Because some of these emails, once in a while, I don't know what the percentage is, a small percentage, actually raises a good point. And yes, they can communicate with one or all of us at the same time, but does it stay there, or is it incumbent upon one of us to raise whatever the issue is to the point of discussion? Mrs. Rosario?
That has happened before, but it all depends on the content of the email. So it might be a particular situation where we just need to forward it to the superintendent. He may not have been tagged in it, and he needs the opportunity to respond in the right way, or forward it to his leadership so that they can respond appropriately. It might be something that we need to address from the dais. In that particular instance, at the beginning of the meeting, you can add that item as a discussion item, and then we can discuss it. And during discussion, you would say, we all received, because I see that we all received this particular email, I want to discuss this because it's that important, and then we continue, through the discussion that way. So I hear you, and it is important, and sometimes it's just a matter of you responding to that particular person, alone, without tagging all of us and just saying, I'm sorry for your situation, I'll take a look at it, whatever it is.
And I'm sure
It all
we all do
depends.
that.
Yeah.
But the real question is it appropriate for you, me, Mrs. Berenborg, any of us, to take it upon ourselves, where we've all been copied on an email, to tee it up for discussion? And I guess you use your judgment.
Yeah, I think we do that all the time.
Yeah.
And we may do it in ways that say, I received communication that, I am aware that, it's been brought to my attention that.
Okay.
Without necessarily saying, Susie Jones sent me this email. I mean, I do that all the time. So I think we can always do that, whether the email came to us individually or came to the board corporate.
So
I think we
in the
do that a
world,
lot.
in the policy that we have right now is you show up in person. Email's not an option.
For
And what-
citizen input, not for communication with the
Right,
board.
right,
Only
right,
for citizen
for
input.
citizen input. So we leave it like that, which is in effect what Dr. Moore, I don't know that you were that specific, but that's what you're intimate. We leave it the way it is, but if someone really wants to communicate with one or all of us, there's that opportunity, and we should encourage people to do that. But we do not accept email input to be read during citizen input.
To be honest, I'm really conflicted about this, because it's a little like Pandora's box, and we've opened it. Prior to the pandemic, when this was not an issue and it was not a policy, we never had this conversation. You showed up to talk to the board, that's just the way it was. Because of the pandemic, and because we've done things differently for a year, we've now opened a possibility that didn't previously exist. Once having allowed that possibility, it now occurs as if it's taking something away to discontinue it. And I have some concern about that, because I don't, and I'm honestly, I'm not clear how I feel about this, because I agree with Dr. Moore. The business of, the board business meeting is to do the business of the board, and when we don't get to the business until 10 o'clock at night, and we're all tired, and we've been here since often, 9, 10 in the morning, we may not be as attentive to things as we would otherwise be, were we more, fresher and more alert. On the other hand, I also don't want to discourage input. I don't want to discourage voices. If somebody feels strongly enough to come and talk to us, I'm not sure I want to discourage that. So to be honest, I have really mixed feelings about this, and I think that having allowed it, whether or not it was previous policy, and whether or not we mean it this way, it now exists as if it's taking something away. And I think we have to be sensitive to that.
Ms. Berenberg?
I'll agree with you. The one thing, though, that I think, do you remember back when we had a 2-day meeting because of citizen input
How could I
reading?
forget?
Yeah, so, the
hours
one
of
thing I
public
will say about that is we saw a lot of repeats. Somebody would send out something and say, please copy this and send it to the board. And so we were seeing the same things being read over and over and over again. That's where it's kind of, I agree, I think I see what they're trying to do. They're making their point that a lot of people feel this way, and I get it, and I want to know that. But I also think you're right. It puts us into starting our meetings at 10 o'clock at night, which is not good for anybody. Because then some people say things that they probably said the wrong way instead of, realizing what they were saying. Not pointing any fingers at anybody, Dr. Moore. He misspoke one word last meeting.
Three words.
3 words, okay, and it was pretty funny if you went back and read it, but
Right.
it's because we were so tired. So I will say this, that I think there could be a way, I've seen other districts do this, where you're allowing citizen input up to a certain point. In other words, the first so many that get in are the ones that are read, the rest of them are sent to the board to read. And I think that's fair, because you had your opportunity to get your input in, and know that it's going to either be read on camera or it's going to be read by the board members, but it's going to be read. I think that's a possibility. I'm not saying that's the way to go, because I want to hear from everybody what your opinion is on it. I do agree that we've opened Pandora's box, and that not everybody has the ability or the time to come here and speak, but they feel very concerned about things. So they pull you aside in the gym and they tell you how they feel, because they don't have the time to come to our meetings. I get that. But I also think that shouldn't have to happen either. They should be allowed to email us. I'll agree with that.
Well, and
Go ahead, yes.
But to that end, I think I sent the board through our executive assistant recently, a policy from, it was either Pinellas or Polk, I can't remember which county, that said, if there are a number of you, that was in their policy, if there are a number of you who are saying the same thing from an organization, we request that you have a representative of your organization speak for the organization. And it was, I think,
I think we have that too.
no, we don't.
No?
No, we don't.
But I'll say a lot of people won't say that they're with an organization. They'll say that they.
But if they're,
feel
right,
that
but if they're sending the exact same email, which we've seen a lot, that there, I agree with you that there should be a way to consolidate that.
Ms. Mazzara,
Thank you. One of the reasons why I'm going to ask that we all maybe come back together again during a board discussion to continue this discussion, because there's a lot that began with agendas, how our meetings are run, including citizen input, that are all encompassing. And it's a greater discussion. If other districts have done it this way, I'd love to see their policy, how it's written before making a judgment on that. So I think that this would be a discuss, and I'm willing to come back for a special session if you all think it's that important.
It is.
I'll come back. I can't come back until after next week, but going away for the weekend. But after the long weekend, sorry. But afterward, I'll come in and I'll meet if you all want to do that. My concern is that we are here, this is one of the reasons why this is so prudent right now, because this is a superintendent workshop. This isn't a board discussion. And yet we are now discussing board items for almost an hour and a half, and the superintendent hasn't even begun his presentations. So this is inappropriate. One or two items to be added that boards want to add should be okay. Again, part of meeting protocols. We have to stick with what the protocols are. If this is a superintendent workshop, he should be the driving force to present to us his items, not us dominating with our very important discussion needs. So I would love for us to add this to whatever you all, whenever, a discussion session, so we can iron all of these details out and figure out what we want moving forward.
well, if we had to change it, we have to write a new policy or amend the existing anyway, so it's not something we can decide today, for
Exactly.
sure.
So we should do
Dr.
that.
Jones?
Well, since I've been here, most of them have been superintendent workshops. I mean, we haven't had a lot of just board workshops. That's why I wanted to add those.
Yeah.
But,
No,
and with the
no.
permission of the superintendent, I think he agreed on, but.
So was it an emergency or a good
Yeah,
cause?
I want to step on back there, lady.
Just saying.
Hey, I've got an idea. Start with the
Not
business
voting, that's
meeting
different.
before the citizen input.
No,
No?
no,
No.
Say
I mean,
that
our
again?
business meetings usually last an hour, but,
no.
I mean, there are some things we can look at. Okay, my last one, am I on the last one now, civility? Can I go with that?
I'm fine.
Okay. And I thought this was important to have on
Did
this
you
workshop.
understand that we're gonna need a?
Table to and I'll work with Nancy to find a date
Okay,
if it doesn't fit.
I
in
was
a
just
future
looking,
agenda.
isn't June 8th our next meeting?
Yeah, but that agenda is packed.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
okay.
June 22nd.
I talked with Dr. Moore and actually Mr. Gress about this because obviously I've been here a long time. In my opinion with civility, the last board meeting was the worst I've seen in 41 years. And it was not the board's behavior. It was a few people were here for citizen input, not all, but a few. And the tape is available for anyone to watch it. Now, in my only time I've seen a recess due to behavior of the audience, there may have been more, but I did not see one before that. In this meeting, we had raised voices, inciting, and disturbances. Phone cameras were in people's faces, in our sheriff's faces. Nothing less than rudeness. We had an academic program we began with so our parents would not have to wait 2 to 3 hours after citizen input. And once they and their students left to get ready to be called into the room, the boardroom had more chairs. Before they left, these people had to witness people yelling in the lobby and in the boardroom before their program started. I am glad they were escorted outside before the program began with our children, our students, so they did not witness all of it. Our staff was also sitting there to see the wonderful accomplishments. This is why we are here in the district. And people complained because the staff wanted to see this wonderful award and wanted their chairs. Again, that is why we are here. We are here to run a business meeting, and the recognition part of the meeting is the best. The superintendent and his cabinet and all staff members, we're here to see the students, parents, and staff members recognized. Our last board meeting, our first speaker was a young man who spoke eloquently and was actually booed when he went out into the lobby by adults. I repeat, by adults, and called a yuppie by someone who spoke during citizen input. They didn't like his definition of critical race theory or anything else he said. I learned more from the young people speaking that night than anyone else. Young adults, I truly listened. The best comment we had is that they're a bigger issue than masks. We need to help those who need help. And just to inform you, if you didn't know, some of our speakers were harassed by those in the board lobby for their lifestyle. We need to make sure that never happens again. When we say we do not discriminate for any reason, race, religion, culture, gender, disability, and sexual orientation, that no discrimination policy needs to include those adults at board meetings. I just cannot imagine this happening with people who came to speak. I guess if people don't like what you have to say, you will be ridiculed. This is a world of sound bites. I've been on the board since November, and I believe in the First Amendment and a citizen's right to speech. But you don't have to be demeaning other people or speak in a sarcastic manner or yell something from where you are sitting. I have seen citizen input at its best, and now I have seen it at its worst. And I know emotions go into some of these issues. Everyone has a right to an opinion, but say it in a way that is not hateful. This year has been hard for many, many reasons, and people can get emotional when they speak, and that is fine. I hear you, but anger, harassment, bullying, and hate do not belong here. We are a school district. We are a school board of education. The question I pose is this: what do we want to model for our students, our schools? We expect everyone to show respect: students, staff, teachers, administrators, and parents. It is in our code of conduct. We can all disagree without being disrespectful. We can disagree without showing hate, and we can disagree without putting it on social media within 3 minutes of the situation happening and never giving the counterpoint. We are a soundbite world, and sometimes with social media, we have forgotten to have a conversation or even give the other side something to say. And one last thing, Dr. Moore, I want to make a comment about what was said to you last week. Be best by kids. Well, you know what, Dr. Moore, that's not all on you. That is the responsibility of this board, our district staff, our teachers, our support staff, and administrators. And I would add a little something to that. Be the best for all students. I repeat, all students. And in closing, Dr. Moore is the superintendent, Mr. Barefoot as our chair, and Mr. DeGressa as our parliamentarian. I want our civility policy followed or even amended if the board so desires, but people who are not acting appropriately need to be removed. We have the most important job in the world. The education of 17,000 students lies with the board. It is in policy. And we do not have time to waste, and neither does our superintendent, teachers, administration, support staff, and district staff. Let's get the job done for all of our students in our school board meetings and have a professional meeting. Thank you.
Mrs. Rosario?
Nicely said. Thank you. I agree. I'm going to come back to the meeting decorum, how we set up our meetings and how we agree what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there. If we follow St. Lucy's policy, the very last item on their policy, number 9, it actually indicates on there disruptive behavior. And it states, it is unlawful to knowingly disrupt or interfere with a school board meeting, and that any such action may result in a misdemeanor offense, although I don't know if that's entirely true, but this is what it reads, may result in a misdemeanor offense of the 2nd degree. This includes individuals who advise, counsel, or instruct students or school board employees on techniques for disrupting a school board meeting. So I think that when we come together, it might be a good idea to include some of these suggestions, get legal counsel on whether it's a misdemeanor or not, and include the right language in this particular place of how our meetings are run and what happens from there moving forward.
Leah?
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree with you. Yes. I do think people get passionate, and sometimes they're frustrated, and sometimes they say stuff that I hope they wish they could have taken back.
I do know, and we're all aware of the fact that there have been some threats made. And I know when I was a principal and I had somebody threaten me, because it does happen, believe it or not, I would remind them, to calm down and that it's a felony to threaten a school board member. And I actually had the felony number memorized back then, because I was working in a really rough area and had to deal with some really tough things. So I will say that I think that people, when they get carried away, they think they can say whatever they want and however they want to say it sometimes, because we're in that world now where people just are used to saying whatever they want to say in social media, and it doesn't matter what, if you use the F-bomb or whatever, and we can't allow something like that here, especially when you had students sitting up there and we're going to be recognized. And what I got frustrated with is that we had to have a commotion and not allow their parents to have a spot. The parents were out there or in the back. But we also had to wait and let the kids have to wait to be honored because of that disruption. So I think that, it would be good to kind of put it out there or have the policy either available for people when they're looking at citizen input, it's right on there. But also maybe something on the wall that says, we act in a certain way and when we come in this room and behave. It's sad that we have to do that, but I think, for the fact that we have students in a lot of our meetings at the beginning, we haven't this year because of COVID, but we have in the past, always at the beginning of our meetings, we start with kids. And it kind of focuses in on why we're here. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, and adults should be models for kids. And I think you're right, it starts with us to do that too. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think it is a long discussion that we need to go through and really take a look at our meeting policy and draft that into the meeting policy. So I'll agree with you.
No, I certainly don't disagree. And my intention is tonight to make a comment similar to what Dr. Jones just said before we start the meeting. Because I'm, for one, and I'm sure all of you would, we're not going to sit here and listen to a bunch of people pontificate. And as a matter of fact, in order to try and avoid that, just as a heads up, I'm going to propose that we rearrange the agenda a bit so that we deal with the business issues first. And if someone wants to comment on anything that's in that consent agenda, they're free to do so. That's what the card is for. And we will do the business, and then other people who want to comment on something that's not on the agenda will be free to do so, but at least we will have the opportunity to get the business of the board behind us. And it's a challenge, I think, and you all, particularly those of you who have been here for a few years, and Dr. Jones, you've been here for a lot of years, if not here, you've been here. And you observe, and you've seen, as I'm sure a lot of our teachers and principals and administrators have watched over the years, once technology allowed it to be broadcast. But the sad part of, and one of you said it, the sad part, I think you did, Ms. Berenborg, this was a night to celebrate these kids. And it was ruined by a bunch of people who are so self-centered and or insecure that they would go to the extremes they went to cause a disruption. It's inexcusable. And whatever the repercussions are, as far as I'm concerned, they deserve what they get or got.
Yeah.
I know you're dying to say something,
No,
Dr.
I'm really
Schiff.
not. It's been said, and I agree and concur with everybody. As difficult as board meetings have been for various reasons over the last few years, it hasn't been like this. And I know this is happening all over the state, all over the country. I know political civility is quickly flying out the window, and people who got into jobs with the intent of doing good and supporting their communities are now feeling physically, emotionally, mentally threatened by the behavior of communities. So that said, Mr. Barefoot, I would agree and encourage a statement to that effect tonight, like you were alluding to. But I would also say that as soon as it starts to become untenable, as soon as it is uncivil, disrespectful, abrasive, that in no uncertain terms, you have the authority to shut it down. You have the authority to cut the camera. You have the authority to recess the meeting. You have the authority to have people removed. And I think we are beyond the point where we err on the side of seeing how it goes. I think we've seen how it goes. So I support and encourage you, as chair, to do what you need to do. And I agree that, by the way, all of these things are part of board policy, which should happen in whether it's a board discussion or a special meeting or whatever it is that we do. All of those can be hammered out in a day we spend together working on those policies. We're not going to finish them today. We just know they need to be done.
Agreed. Ms. Berenborg?
I will say, you mentioned something about changing the order of the meeting or how that's going to go. The only thing I would caution against, since we are expecting so many people to come and speak, I know if I took the time out, left work early and came here, I want to speak and I want to be told I can speak, and I don't want to be told that that now got moved to the end of the meeting. So I would caution you about that. But the board should hear what the community says before voting on something.
But they have the ability on the form where you check the box that they want to speak to item 2C or
Okay.
7-8.
Gotcha.
If they just want to speak,
Okay.
Can we, because sometimes people aren't really clear about that, right? People who haven't been doing this a long time and are not as familiar with the rules or the policies aren't as aware that there's two different ways of speaking. Is there a way that we can make that clear to people as they're filling in the form so that they know that? Because otherwise people will be awfully confused. We know that.
What do you mean? Because
The action
it's written
item?
on the form that they fill out. So how can we be, can you be a little bit more specific?
That somebody might need to actually state that as they're filling in the form, either at the door, in the room, when we get on the board. Because yeah, it says it on the form, yeah, we've said it on the board, yeah, it's in our policies, but that doesn't mean A, people pay attention to it, B, people who are coming for the first time don't know all of those nuances.
May I?
sure.
My concern is from a mom with a young child who comes to speak. I don't necessarily have the freedom to wait until the item of which I want to speak to. So speaking at the beginning of the meeting is the only time that I can do that. So I think that that's part of being careful of the decisions that we make in terms of when citizens speak and when they don't. I don't have an elder that I'm caring for, but there are some who do, and they have to get home right away. There are some who come to speak and they have to get home to cook. There are so many possibilities out there, and I don't want to limit citizen input or push it off to the end of the meeting when we don't know individual issues. So when we have further conversations about this, I want us to be very careful about that.
Well, we can be careful, but again, if there's something on the agenda, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Agresta, or there's something in the consent agenda that a citizen wants to be able to discuss, or much like any of us could pull something on a consent agenda and deal with it, discussion, and then have a vote. We have the ability to do that. Just to use an example, there was nothing on the agenda the last time about masks specifically. And yet, most of the conversation was aimed at masks. We tried to, up front, Superintendent and Mr. Meyer tried to clarify, if that's the right choice of words, the choice that our committee had made vis-a-vis the curriculum. and yet and there was nothing there to vote on per se, but yet a number of people wanted to speak to it. Those are the kinds of things that they should be able to speak, but not before we deal with the items that are there to be voted upon, which is a combination of the consent agenda and very specific items that have been put on there by the superintendent and/or one of us.
Can I make a suggestion?
May I?
Mr.
Can I-
Barefoot?
Can I just say one thing before? I think for tonight, we just need to follow exactly what our piece of paper says.
Yes.
And then hash the rest of this out at our next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, I
we
was going to
decide
say
to
the
do
same
that.
thing. I think we have to
Absolutely.
grin and bear it tonight,
Absolutely.
as difficult as that may be, and make a decision moving forward, which may be included in our civility policy. But I think for tonight, to change it at this moment, when we know it's going to be a volatile meeting and we know more people than usual are planning to show up, we will make matters worse, as I have seen happen in the past with previous boards. I think it will get worse, not better, to be honest, much as I may not be looking forward to it.
So it's, look, we know what's on the agenda. We know what's going to be voted on. I'll guess as to how the things will be voted on. And so if you have but how can I say this?
You probably can't.
I know.
May I?
Yeah.
Mr. Barefoot? You know, it's really very honoring that you are listening to your colleagues share their thoughts on this particular item. Sometimes we are all going to agree on some things, and sometimes we're not. We're going to have a difference of opinion. Ultimately, you are the board chair, and your job as board chair is to run the meeting during our business meetings. And so hearing our wishes, our concerns, it's wonderful to know that we can have this discussion, and to know that you're hearing us and you want to take into consideration your colleagues and their desires. But at the end of the day, that's why you're chair. So you get to make those final decisions because you run the meeting on the day of the meeting.
Yeah, but
We may disagree
serves
on
at the
it,
will of
but
the
you
board.
get to make
That's
those
fine.
decisions.
But the whole,
Yes, I agree, but he still is the board chair.
And what he doesn't want to do, as he has been publicly called out for being, is being, quote-unquote, an autocratic, tyrannical board chair.
I agree.
You know, that's
I'm not
that's
disagreeing.
actually a compliment compared to.
Yeah, and because I don't disagree with you, Mr. Barefoot, and I don't disagree with Dr. Moore. I think we need to get the business done. Given the volatility of what we anticipate this evening, I don't know if tonight's the night to do it, much as I would like to be honest.
All right, well, I guess I will have to decide whether.
Your call, but I'm going
Unless
to tell
we-
you,
well-
I think
Well,
you should listen to the
you know,
four
it'll
women.
happen under the orders of the day, as they always do, and if if things get pulled, they'll get pulled and they'll discussed individually, and the question is, where in the sequencing does citizen input fit? And if it's relative to action items, then there's plenty of opportunity to speak to that action item. Anything that's not related to action items, the option is to put it at the end. I mean, I get it. And I hear all of you, and I can argue both sides of this. It just would be a shame to sit here and listen to the people go on and on and on about the same thing and then vote on something. I know how I'm going to vote on something, and they're wasting their time and our time to keep yapping about something. And then for the people to get up and want to bring up something that isn't even a topic tonight, just to talk, let them talk, but let them talk after the relative business of the board is completed. Now, if I propose, and then we'll go on to the next agenda, to shift, to change the sequencing of the agenda or the program tonight, you all have an opportunity to vote on that. And,
Oh, okay.
and so I don't want to have me put in a position or any of you put in a position where a vote would be misinterpreted. We're stronger together, as they say, than we are apart.
But I think maybe
I-
you're
I-
not hearing us, but I think you just heard us. And if you put it to a vote, I think you heard how we'll
But we're
vote.
gonna vote on it when we meet. We're gonna come to consensus when we meet on what our meetings look like and.
I understand, I'm talking about tonight.
I know, I know.
Well,
I think
I'm
tread
sure-
lightly
I think we
tonight.
should move on.
I got it, all right.
Tread lightly.
All right, Dr. Moore.
All right, Mr. Barefoot, after a long await, we finally get to hear from Mr. Fagan.
Oh, geez,
So,
wait
Mr.
a
Fagan, you
minute.
please present our insurance package renewal.
Thank you, Superintendent, through the chair. Tonight you have an item, annually for the health insurance. We go and review everything to do with health insurance. We look at the trends, the expenditures. This one time was also done again. We also looked at the impact of COVID and the lack of a lot of selective procedures that were probably not done during COVID that may pick up next year. However, some of them may just choose not to do them. So using Aon as our primary source, looking at our trends and our analysis, we came up with a 3% increase overall for everyone. This was reasonable, customary, and justified based upon our experience. 3% means the board rate will go up by 3%, so it will go up to it will go up $18. All employees will get 3% raise based upon the plan they're on. So some people might see a $1 increase if they were maybe on the lowest plan and only had an employee, and if they were married and only had a family plan and chose the highest plan, that would be a $26 increase per month. So cut that in half because you do it twice a month. Total increase overall is $572,000. Total plan increases to approximately $19 million overall. Any questions?
Nope, just good job on the, aren't we about 8 million? On that chart, it went up to 8 million.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. The fund balance currently is very strong at $8 million.
Safe Harbor's around 2.5,
3 million.
3 million, okay.
Also, I forgot to add, this was also recommended by HITAF and also was approved by both unions.
That was my question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, to clarify, the HITEF and both, because as I understand it, so this will be an increase to the board as well as to individual employees. In the past, sometimes the unions have objected when the board actually absorbs the whole cost because they anticipate a higher and more difficult to absorb raise in a future year. But this year, everybody is absorbing some portion of the increase.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
And the unions are good with that, HITEF's good with that?
Yes, ma'am. Both chairs, both unions have approved.
It didn't seem like a really high increase compared to the other years.
No, one year, I was gonna mention for the board members who weren't here, one year there was a proposed increase of, I think it was 15%. It was something ridiculous. It was really, really high. And then, am I wrong with the 15? It was in the teens.
I thought it was
It
30.
was, it was
30,
several boards.
30?
was high.
Look at that,
Times two.
even more. And so we really struggled with trying to figure out, nobody really could afford the 30% increase. But we understood the role of HITEF is to make recommendations. And ultimately, it was up to the board to decide what that increase would be. We certainly didn't settle on the 30 or whatever was the recommendation at the time. We kind of met them in the middle. So that was my first round with this. This is an easier round, thanks to Mr. Fagan. So I'm happy to approve it, and I'm glad that you are here, and I don't want you to go anywhere.
No plans.
Make
Also-
sure you stay,
Also
because you're
through-
doing the district good, Mr. Fagan.
Also, through the chair, there was also no changes in the plan. So all the deductibles, all the coverages, everything remained exactly the same, so no changes there. The other part of the item is also a stop-loss policy. Stop-loss policy, the primary objective is to protect the district should you have a large number of large dollar claims. This is where we pass the risk on to a reinsurer. And so that liability, that premium cost us about $800,000, but in theory, if you have 5 or 6 $500,000 claims, if those total claims cost us $3 million, we'll get $2 million back. So basically, it's insurance for insurance, because if not, then that would directly hit the plan, and that would possibly cause you a double-digit increase, because now you need the revenue to make that up.
How did we do it this year on that?
On that increase this year was, oh, I'm sorry.
For the, in other words, the stop loss, if you had so many employees that had claims, how did we do with our claims this year with those employees?
We basically made probably a 2-to-1 from the premiums that we paid out for the stop loss. We made back twice as much money. So we paid $800,000. We got basically $1.6 million back.
Okay.
The increase in the premium was approximately 12%. It was 15%, but however, working with Aon, not Neon, Aon's influence, they got it down to about 12%, which is industry average because you have a lot of large dollar claims that are out there that people are trying to pass on to a reinsurer. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, and maybe Miss Mary D. Mercado would be able to chime in on this. I'm not sure, within the high-tech meetings, I'm just wondering how COVID played a part in the decision or in the recommendation of the 3%. Moving forward, I'm not so sure. Usually it's looking at historical claims and then coming to the table and saying, we project this many in the future. Would you have any idea?
Through the chair, based upon the analysis Aon did, they did a projection somewhere between 1% and 6% as an impact of COVID and other trending factors. We picked the middle road and said approximately 3%. So the impact of COVID and future COVID cases are in that number.
It's interesting, and it probably is not going to play a factor right now, but there are some who believe that as a result of COVID, people being home, there aren't very many claims to be had because they're not going to work and they're not traveling, they're not getting hurt. But on the other hand, then you have the psychological, the emotional concerns, medical concerns that might have come as a result of COVID, isolation, et cetera. Maybe people are not wanting to go to the doctor because they're afraid to go to the doctor, or they're told not to go to the doctor, and so cancer screenings are missed, and elective surgeries are not had. So I was just wondering, where all of that played in this.
Through the chair, that is factored in, but there's no crystal ball to determine if that long-term effect of a 1 year of COVID will have a massive impact in healthcare in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I certainly want to acknowledge this was something that was a high hill to climb in previous years. So HITAF, the members of HITAF, the committee, our union leadership, Jennifer, Maureen, Mike, Mr. Bass, Ms. Olt, Mary D., Mr. Fagan, of course, this is a great acknowledgement of the progress the district is making, something that used to be so arduous now, just standing operating procedure. So very proud of that work. And now moving on to Mr. Meyer and the CNI contracts.
To the chair, thank you, Dr. Moore. Unfortunately, these aren't quite as exciting as some of the stuff I've recently brought to you guys. We could go as in depth as we'd like to on these, but to be honest, these are all renewals of contracts that the district has had in place for many years. MOUs, there are 2 actual contracts with iReady and Edgenuity, but the remainder of the items are simply agreements that the board has had in place for numerous years. Thanks again to Mr. Fagan's team and Mr. DeGressa for helping us review those and make sure they are up to legal standards and risk this year once again. So I'm happy to entertain any questions about any of the items. I don't really think I need to go line by line, but it can obviously answer any questions about any of them that we may have.
Question.
Go ahead.
Edgenuity has,
Yes.
I heard something about product changing or something changing with Edgenuity this next year.
So
Is that gonna
the
affect
item, the great question, the item that I'm bringing for curriculum instruction is just the use of Edgenuity for credit recovery. So given the reorganization that we went through last year, Ms. Dampier's team oversees the virtual instruction side of the house, and I believe Ms. Dampier will be bringing those VIP, what they call virtual instruction provider contracts at a later meeting date. I don't know, I haven't been in the talks, whether or not Ms. Dampier is bringing Edgenuity, I'll let her handle that. But this one in particular is just for the use of it as a credit recovery option, given the fact that we had so many students going through and using Edgenuity this year. They're still working to catch up and finalize those courses. We didn't think that it would be appropriate to switch providers right now in the middle of the summer, like with the fiscal year, because we have students that are trying to
Credit
get
recovery
caught up
over the summer,
before,
right.
before the start of the next school year. We did look at other credit recovery providers, but the best choice I feel for the district is to maintain this contract for another year right now, given the circumstances that we're in.
We will be bringing that item as a, at our next board briefing next week. We'll have that item. We still have some loose ends to tie up with Edgenuity. I had some questions in reference to their contract. So we will be bringing all of the ones for our virtual school as well as for the expansion for next year.
Okay, and parents have the right to look at those
Yes.
materials? Okay.
That's a good question. May I? Sorry, that's a good question. Do the recommendations for virtual program follow the same recommendations as the curriculum, the traditional book curriculum, the 30 days, allowing parents to have access or review it? How does that work?
I will have to research that because I know instructional.
If you could see the faces
Yeah.
that it's so funny, everybody's
Because I
like,
know K
what?
through 12, normally the instructional material, they give us an outline. I will research that with the DOE
Yeah,
and
but
find
now
out.
that we're doing virtual school as a school, and the curriculum that is used within the virtual school should also be vetted, I just don't know what that would look like.
Right, I'll take a stab at this, Ms.
Right.
Dampier. Yes, if they're using our teachers, and our teachers are the ones providing, and then our teachers would be using the curriculum that's adopted by this school board. Parents do have, we are required in law to offer parents multiple options for virtual instruction providers. So if they were to choose one of the other providers, those providers may be using a different curriculum. But that's not obligated. The parents take that choice. They're open to choosing that or
So
not.
are we going to hear of the three options when Mrs. Dampier brings that to us? And then do the parents have 30 days? Like, what is that process? Do they have their 30 days to view before choosing?
I mean.
We don't know, right?
They would already have, their process to go through and decide their curriculum isn't the same as ours necessarily. I think that it would be sort of unique to each provider as to the time in which they adopted the curriculum that they're doing. So I wouldn't say per se that they're exactly going through an ELA adoption right now for their standards. So as far as parents having an opportunity to speak with them, I'm sure that they would be transparent as to the materials that they use. But as far as an adoption, that's a separate issue, I think.
It's interesting. I'm curious to know. It was a great segue, because that's not something that I previously thought of until just now.
May I make a statement?
Yeah.
My apologies, I have an appointment I could not get out of that I need to leave. I apologize, but I will watch before our board meeting tonight because I know those items we're voting on, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
All righty. Any other questions about my other contract renewals?
Good.
All right, thank you.
Next item is Ms. Dampier, exceptional student education policy and procedures.
Through the chair, we're required every 3 years to submit to the DOE revisions, if any, to our exceptional students education policies and procedures manual. This manual has gone extensively through the state, and every step of the way they've given us feedback. So they take the manual in every section. They give us feedback to update before we actually bring it to the board and then submit it back to them as a manual. There's minor changes that were added this year. For example, we had changes in terminology. We used to have a prevention intervention specialist. We no longer have that. Now we have behavior analysts. Also, we used to have an executive director, and now we changed that with director. So just some minor changes that were added. Usually, if there's language as far as the legislation, we have to update that, but we didn't have any of this particular time. So are there any questions?
No, just a comment. I have really enjoyed being part of the ESE Parent Advisory and listening to those Zoom meetings, and I just love the collaboration with the parents, the staff members, and just the movement of where they want to go with their students, but it's really been a great experience. Thank you.
Yeah, just real quick, does this have any direct impact right now, other than the few language changes, on anything we're specifically doing or not doing right now?
No, all of this information that we put into the portal has been updated by, or approved by the state. and it's in line with everything else. They make sure they give us feedback if we haven't answered the question correctly pertaining to policies and procedures, and then we have to go back in the portal, update it, then they tell us it's okay to bring forward to the board, but no changes as far as legislation for May or June, anything that has been approved for this coming year.
So this is,
We'll update it again. It's continuous. It's like an annual if there are legislative changes. And they usually let us know what those changes are, and then we have to update the manual and bring it back.
so this is, just to be clear, so this is only reflecting legislative changes that need to be added to our existing policies, no more, no less?
Yes. And if there are minor changes to names, terminology, et cetera, that we may change.
Because I know that there's work we're about to undergo in the ESE department and,
Yes.
and structuring and organizationally and all that, but
Yes.
this is completely separate from that.
Yes.
All right, next three items, I'll introduce them all at the same time, so Mr. Bass can flow through them, is the non-instructional calendar and the associated MOU, the salary increase for our non-bargaining employees, as well as the transportation zone RZ pass agreement.
Good afternoon, through the chair. Happy to bring to you a successfully negotiated non-instructional work calendar for the employees that are on the 180-day, 186, 196, 220, and 250 work schedule. I'd like to thank Ms. Oak and the HR team and Mr. Fagan's team for getting this done. It was agreed upon on May 11th, and two major changes or highlights of this these calendars. First is teachers' assistants will have PD days at the beginning of the school year. In the past, their two PD days were embedded within the school year. They would show up the first day that kids would show up, and that really is not conducive to preparation and getting started for the school year. So that is a big win there for teachers and assistants and school staff. And then also, we have 12-month employees' work days align now with the school calendar, whereas before we had actually individuals working and their supervisors were off. So we've got that straightened out, and two big wins in that calendar. Next item I've got is the salary increase for 2021 and 21-22. So the salary increase would be a 2% increase for all non-bargaining employees, retroactive to July 1, 2020. Also, a 2% increase for 21-22 that would begin effective July 1. I'd like to take a moment and just brag on not just the non-bargaining employees, but all our employees over this past year. Have really put the work in, really taken things on that we normally have not done so. I'm just thrilled that we are in a position financially to be able to have everyone compensated and a bump up in salary. Looking forward to getting started with negotiations with CWA very soon to get them hopefully in a good place also, which they're finishing up their 3-year contract. We have tasked employees pretty well this year. Brag on our superintendent for a minute. The grass does not grow under his feet, and we are constantly moving and pushing, and everyone has responded greatly. So thrilled to be in that. This salary increase will make our administrative salaries more competitive with our competing districts. We're really low on the district level administration salary end. Principals, not as much, but this will go a long way to get us up to where we need to be. Yes, ma'am.
In my experience, there's usually like a hiring cutoff date, after which someone might not be eligible for this because they were hired within the time frame prior to this. Is there such a date in this? Is that clear? I'm not sure if I'm clear on what I'm asking.
Yes, ma'am, you are. I don't know that we have identified that. I believe we were going to, since we're behind in comparison to other districts, we were going to go ahead and put it in place once they were hired. Keeping in mind, we have a salary range. So, putting them on that schedule based on their years of experience, if we were to bump everybody else up, we would still be looking at that same range and the experience level?
So I guess my point is, if this is affecting non-bargaining employees 2021, 2022, they would have to have been hired prior to a certain point to be eligible for this increase, right? If they were hired the week before whatever is the date, then technically they wouldn't be eligible, right? That's just how it works in my academic environment. That's, I know there's things in the superintendent's contract about what he's eligible for when, having met certain criteria. So I'm just trying to understand that better.
So I think the clearest way for the non-bargaining individuals, which includes administrators, the date in which we are in that specific position, they'll receive the retroactive. Now, for going into next year, there is language in the salary handbook that looks at an either-or situation in comparison to if you got a raise of 2% and you were just promoted, you probably don't get that 2%, you just got the raise, which is probably more along the lines of what you're actually saying.
It's in there. But could we get some clarification on how that works?
I mean, yeah, we can do that, but anyone in these rates from the date in which they've had them in this calendar year that we're about to conclude, they will receive that 2%.
So the academic year, not the calendar year,
yes.
right?
Well, our calendar, yeah.
So, I know,
right.
I've been an academic for 30
Yeah.
years, I think, I get the two confused. So if somebody were in their position for the academic year 2021, and they had been in that position for the entire year, they would be eligible. But if they were hired in, let's say, February, March, April, would they be eligible?
Through the chair, they would be retro back to that date.
Yeah.
To the date they were hired?
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
It's pretty standard. I mean, when it's prorated to the length of time they've been working.
Yeah, I know that there's usually language, I mean, when we get raises at the university, when there's stuff, there's usually language that specifies you have to have been employed as of a certain date in order to be eligible for this. That's all I'm asking.
Can I ask a question? The 2%, just, how did you arrive at the 2%? Or any number that you arrive at? Do you have a process? Do you look at regional CPI? Do you look at national CPI? Do you look at?
That's what we came up with, the cost of living, and then also, to be totally honest, what we could afford also.
Well, yeah. But before you get to that point, what can I afford? You try and benchmark where we are vis-à-vis the cost of living increases and the like.
Yeah.
And then hope you can afford to at least keep people whole.
I think we've done a good job of balancing the principals and assistant principals. So we looked at and identified a target, how do we appropriately compensate in comparison to surrounding counties? And this does a good job of bringing us within the specific range of other districts outside of us. In some cases, still below, where we have significant work yet to do and have to really problem solve is at the district level positions. They're drastically underfunded in comparison to our counterparts. So there's more work to be done in terms of the district folks, but in terms of our principals and assistant principals, we now can call ourselves competitive.
And when you put and this maybe is more appropriate for when we get into budgets, but you budget a salary increase of X number of dollars. Do you separately budget based on merit? I mean, do you have a merit line, or is it all one line? And how do you then reward? Because again, whether it was running a college, we would reward based on merit, and then obviously you'd have the normal 2% or whatever it is for everybody else. How do you or can you reward for someone who went above and beyond?
Through the chair, the district itself for non-bargaining does not have a merit increase formula. You get a straight 2%. The only one who gets a performance or a merit is your teachers and your principals. So our 2% is straight 2% on your base salary. Now, if you are less than effective, you won't be here. That's the merit. You must be highly effective, or I'm sorry, you had to find another place. but there is no sliding scale that says you're effective, you're slightly effective, you're highly effective, that says of the 2%, you get 1.5, or maybe you only get 1%.
But, well, maybe this is a side conversation. I mean, if this were my business, I'd figure out how to pay someone who is performing above and beyond that would warrant a merit increase besides the normal increase.
Gotcha.
Whether you have a line item or whether you have the flexibility within that salary line. But, you know, that's another conversation.
To that,
Yes.
In-
Ms. Rosario?
Interestingly, before Dr. Moore came in, one of the tasks that I know Dr. Moore took on, and Mr. Fagan actually, before Dr. Moore took on, was kind of figuring out how to level off some of the salaries that we had here, because you had some people who were coordinators making more than directors, or, you know, some people in some titles making more either because they were here longer or because their boss just decided they were going to give them a raise for no particular reason, and so those people had a higher salary than some of the others on their same level. And of course, Mr. Fagan can speak more, and Dr. Moore, to this. And one of the charges was to kind of level the playing field, essentially, and make those who were on the same salary scale paid the same. So there wasn't any favoritism. I think to a certain extent, I see what you're saying, but it didn't work. It was very unfair. There were many people in the district who knew that some were getting more than others for no particular reason, for not essentially reaching a particular benchmark. And it was very, very, very unfair. So I appreciate what we have in place right now because it's fair and it's honest, and it's allowing everyone to be able to see salary transparently. Whereas maybe in the future, if we can afford, I'm sorry?
No, just thank
Yeah.
You're right. Thank you. That's what I said.
Maybe in the future, if we can afford to do some sort of bonus, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get there, but they've done a pretty good job at that. Dr. Moore?
I was going to say, for as Mr. Fagan mentioned, for teachers and principals, there's statute that drives
Yeah.
incentive pay. And in terms of overall district, Ms. Rosario, I think, captured it perfectly. We had a salary handbook that was, the amount of gray that was in that book was not for a public institution. So we have very standard operating procedures on percent increases for raises, norming across the ranges as they lay themselves. So we're very proud of that work, and ensures that we're being consistent, open, and honest.
Dr. Jones?
Well, I just want to say thank you. Many times, the non-bargaining employees seem to be a stepchild, and I served on a couple of these studies with administrative pay, and I'm glad you're doing it right for the principals, and hopefully we can get it for district staff, because it was very notable probably 6-7 years ago with administrators compared to others around the district. So it's a great place to live, and we want to make sure people can live here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, we have the great increase for our teachers this year, and I'll say it right now, teachers are never paid enough, but we've got to get it to the point where, you know, we value them, but we also have to value them financially.
Well, it sounds like once you got through the evening out process, where all these variations or inequities or whatever you want to call them, which was the first order of business, now at least you feel on a relative basis, people are properly positioned. And then by giving, of course, someone makes more, 2% of a higher number is going to be more money. So,
Yep.
you know, that's simple math.
And this is,
This thought process is foreign to the world that I lived in. You know, I live, and even at the college level, I don't know, Dr. Schiff, about you, but we went out of our way to reward people who performed above and beyond. And, you know, you have performance evaluations, and someone met expectations, or they exceeded, or they far exceeded. And if you met, exceeded, and far exceeded, there was a difference in the percentage increase or the dollar amount that you got. Now, the problem with that sometimes is you're building that into the base. Another way to handle is have a bonus, then it's not built into the base. But at any rate, it's, I ask these questions because this is the perception that I've always had when you get into the bureaucracy of public entities, government. This is not government, but it's government-like. And you end up not being able to reward people who perform above and beyond what their peers do.
Yeah, Mr. Barefoot, our higher ed experience has been significantly different, because I've worked for a public university for nearly 30 years now, which, I've been a faculty member, not the president. So in a public university, we're very limited what we can do. A public university, like a public education K-12 organization, is really limited. We can't do that. Like the experience that you've had at a private university where you have flexibility, we're limited by statute, we're limited by legislation, we're limited by collective bargaining, we're limited by a board of trustees at this point. So I assure you, we do not get merit pay based on the work that we do. We get it because it's a collective bargaining agreement. We don't get it based on, because we've done an exceptionally good job. Public institutions work really, really differently. So I completely understand the difference between what is and isn't possible in the K-12, and in effect, the lack of flexibility that we have to reward people monetarily for doing a good job. Instead, what I know the superintendent has tried to do and what happens in public institutions is we try and do that through non-monetary ways. But it works, it's a whole different ballgame in public ed than in private.
No, I get it, but, you know, and when you got a
I wish
contract,
it was-
you have a contract. But as Dr. Jones said, it's the non-people that are part of a bargaining unit
Yep.
that you want to make certain that those people, I mean, they've got to trust management, in this case you all, for making sure whether it's dollars and cents or just an extra thank you or a gift card to go to, you know, the local steakhouse for dinner, that we appreciate their performing above and beyond what would normally be the norm.
Yeah, it's,
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
All right, my last item is transportation update on some things that I'm very excited about, and I've discussed it with you guys in briefings and would like to publicly present it today. The first item is a couple of things that we're going to be doing, and the first item is ID cards, which were really not existent across the district. In the past, we did start with some cards this year for food service, but in the transportation realm, we feel like we need to be able to be more accountable as to when our students are getting on and off of the bus. This particular solution will provide that. The cards will be multifunctionality cards. And Ms. Rosario, I recall our briefing, you hit it on the head. This, first and foremost, is a security item because we need to know what kids are on our campuses and be able to identify them. It does not happen often, but it did happen this year. We have a student that isn't supposed to be on our campus, and we don't have any way to identify them. With an ID card that they would wear with a breakaway lanyard, that will give us that opportunity. Here's sample cards that we will be having made for the students. If you look at the card up in the top right-hand corner, is more like what we're going to be looking for. So they'll have their picture on there. It will be school-specific and have the barcode. Now, the barcode will work on the scanner when they get on and off of the bus. But also, whether it be the barcode or a magnetic strip on the back, depending on the readers that we have in the other areas, it will also work for food service and media services for checking items out in the media center. So really excited about that. The process for the scan, we'll have a card reader on all buses. We already have card readers at each food service line and in each media center. This particular item that we would be approving today will provide us 27 printers to be able to have at each site, and a couple of extras, so they can print cards for if a student loses a card, if we get a new student. And then we will have additional spare readers that we can put on the buses if by chance one of them fails. Supplies that will come with the package is the breakaway lanyards up in the top right-hand corner, and we will have enough of those to outfit the students all with one and have a large plethora of breakaway lanyards for if they lose any moving forward. The next item is another item that I was briefed with you all is the parent app, the Z-Pass, which is the real-time map-based bus locator. You'll be able to set up a parameter for when your bus is going to be at your house. You set this geo-fence up between 50 meters and 500 meters, and it pings every 10 seconds, so you know when the bus is coming, or when your student is going to be dropped off. Parents would load this on their phone. It will also be able to send out push notifications to say if a bus substitution occurred or if a bus is running late, rather than getting the call outs that we see that a lot of parents just send straight to voicemail. You can also set multiple zones for families with kids at different schools. So if you have, one in elementary, one in middle, one in high, you can have a different geo fence and bus tracker for each one of them. The parent app goes through a multi-step process to ensure the authenticity and confidentiality, much like Focus would be password protected. I think this is going to go a long way for helping our parents in seeing when the bus is coming and where their kids are at. And that is, and we would not need approval for this tonight because this is under procurement amount.
Ms. Rosario?
I'm very, very excited about this item. I would ask, and I know that it's under, I wish it wasn't under consent, because we've talked about this. This needs to be presented at our business meeting. Parents need to see this, not just at the workshop. I'm pretty surprised it's not on there because we agreed that it would be presented to them at a business meeting. I don't know if we can make arrangements this evening. I think this is quite a lot of money, and it's very, very important for everybody to be aware that this is coming. It's a good thing. Can we add it? Where would we add it? How would that work this evening?
It's under consent. So, I mean, you could put it to the, pull it for action item.
Action. I just think that this is such a good thing. One of my questions, board members, I submitted several questions to Mr. Bass because there were still some unknowns. And one of the things that I wanted to know is how are we going to pay for this? Where is this going to come from? And the answer was, Mr. Bass?
The initial cost would be through CARES dollars. And so, yes, ma'am. So, and then you would have a renewal fee each year. It runs about $1,000 per school.
And I thought there was another, with some of the follow-up, I think you said the monies for the follow-up or the maintenance of it, if a machine breaks, I gotta go to my answers. If the machine breaks, the maintenance is not costly.
I believe it's covered for 3 years, and then after that, it will not be much cost at all.
So one
Because
of
the readers themselves are relatively inexpensive, and they're tied into the computer GPS and everything that we already have on the buses, because we already have part of this service on our buses already. And, the reinstall will be very simple. It's just a simple disconnect wiring on the back and just put a new reader down.
So one of the other things that I wanted to know, I'm just letting board members know what we talked about, was the benefit of this to our audits.
Yes, ma'am.
So our transportation audits, historically have not been great. They've been by hand, and there have been some errors and resulting in lots of money lost, essentially. how does this benefit us in terms of our audits that happen,
You know,
that occur?
it being something automated and we can print out is going to go a long way for, one, for accuracy, but then also with the state auditor when they come in every 3 years for their operational audit. You know, a lot of times they will start off and they will pull attendance of students, and then they will look to see if that student was a bus rider. And if they are a bus rider, then they match that up and make sure that that student rode the bus that day. Where you get into trouble sometimes is a individual, let's say it's a substitute bus driver, they have their sheet of paper and they're marking each student off as they come in to ensure that they rode, and then they cross-compare that to attendance and find that the kid was not in school that day. And you get a certain percentage of those errors, then it opens the door for deeper investigation, and a lot of times districts end up losing funding for transportation, which is already sorely underfunded through the FEFP.
And then my last question that I didn't submit to you, and thank you for sending me your answers. In this app, will this app only monitor transportation? What about lunch money and books owed? The app doesn't connect?
It is not. It is not. I wish, it would be great if it did, and maybe that's something down the road that they can incorporate in it.
It would be really good if they did, because then in one place, parents have all access to lunch money still owed, lunch money paid, how much is on their balance, and books.
But good news is USDA has extended no-cost meals for all students for all of next year also. So maybe we won't have that issue next year.
Good news. Yes, sir.
For clarification to the chair, funding source of general fund, not CARES.
Oh,
General fund, not CARES.
sorry about that error.
Just a couple really quick. You said, but I really want to highlight the impacts for safety and security on this. It more important, or at least equally important as all of the other benefits of this, is the security issue, which that we haven't addressed that for as long as we have. I'm really glad we're finally getting to it, because that we don't know who's, you know, God forbid there's an incident and we don't know who's on our campus at any given time is a disaster. We've avoided that disaster. I hope we always, I hope, pray, and, you know, whatever all else, we always avoid that disaster. But I'm, in the greater context of comprehensive approaches to safety and security, this one is really essential. So thank you for that. I want to also just clarify, Mrs. Rosario mentioned it's quite a bit of money. The amount I'm seeing here is $65,820.
Yes, ma'am, that's the
That's the
initial.
total amount, right?
Initial upfront for the card readers.
And then you said, and then after a certain amount of time, it's like, to get the cards, it's about $1,000 per school,
It's a renewal fee each year.
renewal fee. I think that sounds really reasonable, frankly, for the benefits of a system like this that tracks kids, gives us IDs. It's a security issue, it's a bus issue, it's a parents issue. There's so many benefits to this.
No, I think it's a
the
great
cost
thing. It's
is
still
totally
costly.
reasonable.
I mean, it's still 65,000 plus. It's still costly. I think we should do it. It's long overdue, but I still think it's pretty costly.
I think in the grander scheme of our expenses, it's a bargain.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a cost-benefit analysis. It's pretty simple to come to the right conclusion. Dr. Jones?
Speaking as a parent who had children on the bus, thank you. Speaking as a principal who took many calls after school because their students weren't home, thank you. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the best money I've seen spent in a while. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Two things I would like to point out. You know, if you break it down, 500 meters out is 0.311 miles, which in the world that I come from, the district previously I was in, that's nothing. Here you have neighborhoods, that's a pretty good distance, but the standard market for this in the industry is not any more than that, because then you don't want someone to gain access and be able to track that bus everywhere it goes around in the county. So I just wanted to point that out. And then the other thing, it needs to be said, but it will be a learning experience for our students and our families to get accustomed to wearing their lanyard every day. We know that we're going to have some that forget them. We know that we're going to have some that lose them. But believe me, seeing it and doing it in another district, it does not take long to catch on. And a lot of times, especially the younger guys, are really proud of that ID card.
Yes.
Well, depending on the picture, but, okay.
Okay.
All right, the next item is a review of a policy. If you recall, in the wee hours of our last board meeting, Ms. Barrenborn presented a policy in which she received communication, and that policy was board staff communications. And the conversation that we had that evening is it needed to be modified because we weren't adhering to the policy in which it was written. Upon further investigation, I find a policy with the exact same title, Board Staff Communications. This policy was updated in 2013. The one in which we were referencing was 2007. And this policy, I think, is appropriately written and allows us to continue with our standing operating procedures, which give board members a level of confidence in their communication, which they should rightfully have with district staff and our employees in the field. And the major difference is that the board or its committee shall be preferably submitted through the superintendent, which basically means that preferably, yes, the information does come through the office of the superintendent, but there are opportunities for our staff to engage specifically with you. What I will be doing is aligning the language within these two policies to ensure that they're consistent, so there will be no more concerns for board members, and I'll work with legal to get that to the board for that modification. And that is that item.
Can I just, a real quick thing on that? We actually have several policies about board staff communication. We've got, because I looked this up for somebody who wrote to me, we've got this one, 4112, we've got 149.3, we've got 3112, and as in this one, it says board staff communications preferably, though not mandatorily, go through the superintendent, so nothing prohibits anybody from communicating with a board member or communicating around the district. There's also in policy 149.3 board staff communications. There's
that one? I'm sorry.
Hang on.
0149.3.
Thank you, yes. Board staff communications, where much of this is redundant, but it also says this communication protocol is not intended to not deny any staff member his or her constitutional right of free speech or the right to appeal or to otherwise address the board on important matters through established procedures. We've got it all over the place. There's 3 or 4 policies that address this. It's not an issue that people cannot communicate in the district. We have it well codified.
Correct. But I will align those two
Yep.
specifics, so we're good. All right, our final evening is the reorganization of the district. This is an item that I'm bringing a little bit early, but I think it's completely appropriate at this specific time. It allows us to have staff in place come the new fiscal year in order to ensure that we continue to hit the goals and the objectives identified within our strategic plan. The true foundation of this reorganization is the alignment and being intentional around our strategic plan. As you know, when we adopted our strategic plan, which is still under a year, we began with a values-based budget system, ensuring that every dollar spent was aligned and justified to the support and improvement of the action aligned to our strategic plan. That exercise over the course of the last year easily identified a 2% overall, actually a 5% cost savings to the district allocation, the district budget. That allows us to really invest that money back into the system and ultimately back into school budgets, which is the intention. The overall cost of this realignment or reorganization or shifting of responsibilities comes to the district with a 2% savings, a $371,912 savings to the district, which is exactly what the intention was. And we look forward to continuing to shrink the district budget and maximizing the resources as close to children as possible. In the re-envisioning of the system as a whole, there are significant opportunities to improve the support, that the district provides to schools in the creation, the packaging, the marketing, the clearing of red tape, and as well as generating funds where we can in order to ensure we are an innovative school system. I say all the time, we're a public school system, but we don't have to choose to act like a public school system. And some of the foundational changes within this reorganization are just that. You'll see a number of positions being offered that come at no cost to the district, but actually become as cost-generating positions, and we'll review some of those as we move through. There are some expected outcomes as a result of this. A business efficiency review, maximizing expenditures in order to ensure we as a system are appropriately providing support and services to school. We need to drastically enhance extended learning opportunities. We've done some good work in creating the systems and structures around extended learning opportunities. But as we move into next school year, we're going to have to maximize every single moment that we have with children, and that includes summer school programming, that includes extended learning opportunities after school, and maximizing what we call our wraparound services, our community partners that are providing that after school. Significant opportunities to really be more efficient or effective in that specific area. As I mentioned, I charged cabinet members to look within their organizations to define, are there opportunities to generate funds or improve the systems of support that we're providing through partnerships, and we'll review some of those. The opportunity to engage our families and our community members is still something we need to do a better job of, and we'll be talking through how we'll be doing that. Parental support in our community. We made a first stab at parental involvement, and quite honestly, the distribution of that work was ineffectively designed by me. So being more intentional about how we're going to leverage and engage parents is a key opportunity with this reorganization. And then looking at how we're leveraging the ability to provide access to students to ensure that we're equitably providing resources to all students. We're being inclusive in all areas of the system, and then we're appropriately attaining the progress that needs to be done. As we started this meeting, we spoke about the desegregation order. We spoke about unitary status. We need to appropriately ensure that we have those structures and systems in place to continue to manage that particular work. So I will quickly review, I'll go cabinet member by cabinet member, and their offices. In the area of finance, Mr. Fagan is suggesting a position that will be funded by Florida Blue. And this is a wellness program specialist. This individual will help create programming, create initiatives, provide development and support to ensure that we have a healthy staff in our system. The healthier and more well-being individuals are in our system, the lower the cost of our insurance, as well as the benefit for us. A happy, engaged, healthy staff that can connect and engage for students comes at absolutely no cost to our district. Mr. Bass earlier mentioned what we've done in terms of food quality and providing resources to those particular schools. We understand that we can turn a profit if we are more efficient and effective at marketing those food initiatives, branding what's going on in our cafeterias, kind of celebrating the good food that's being served, as well as continuously improve the quality. So we think with this, we know we can cover the cost of this and generate funds with this specific position, which is our marketing and quality food control specialist. In the area of the Department of Advocacy, Athletics, and Student Activities, I am recommending a realignment or repurposing of that position, creating the Assistant Superintendent of Student Affairs, Advocacy, and Access. This individual will oversee 3 key areas within our district, continuing to build the opportunities for students to have access, ensure the experience that students are having is effectively done, and ensuring that we're equitably providing resources to all students, and we're continuing to engage and activate parents. So we will repurpose that particular position, and we'll be extremely intentional about how we are ensuring that equity is the responsibility of everyone in this system, and we collectively understand what the definition of that word is, as designed by the School District of Indian River County in our community, and then really become intentional about providing the appropriate level of support to work collaboratively as a community within this specific area. Also, the equity coordinator and community engagement, that position will be repurposed. We're going to bifurcate those two particular areas, ensuring that the equity coordinator is solely responsible for that particular area, a deep analysis of supporting our community, supporting our teachers, supporting our administrators, building a deeper understanding of how we will implement that very specific work in our county and do it together, not in isolation, not in a silo, but ultimately engaging our community to deepen what it means for us as a community to work together, enhance the creation of a school system that really ensures all means all. The appropriate resources are being provided to each and every single child that needs to be provided, so they have every opportunity to connect themselves to their full potential, connect themselves to the success that a school system should be designed and created a way to ensure we become the path, we become the light that ensures that that can be a reality for them. Also, creating a parental and community involvement, a sole position to engage parents in our community. We don't want parents not to feel welcomed. We don't want parents to feel as if they don't have absolute, complete access to our schools. And we as a system need to be intentional about how we're creating programming and packaging those programs at our school sites, making our principals' job as easy as possible. Parental involvement and access at school sites is not at all what it should be. And truth be told, because of this school year and the pandemic, that became very, very hard to do. But now, as we move beyond COVID, we need to ensure that we're accessing and leveraging our parents and ensure that they are equal partners in this work, and that they feel included, they feel welcome, they know their voices being heard, and they see the school system as a tool really to ensure that their children, who they love, is being effectively educated to ensure that they have those opportunities to find all the success that they rightfully deserve. Moving on to curriculum and instruction. There was a CTE coordinator position. We have moved away from that position and then repurposed that to a STEAM position. Science, technology, engineering, the arts, mathematics is a crucial area in which we need additional support from a district perspective to continue to grow those programs. Once again, packaging, resources, support services provided from the district that makes the teacher's job easier, makes the principal's job easier. There are significant opportunities to enhance that specific work. It is a very big initiative for our district. Repurposing that position allows us to do that work at a much deeper level. That position will be assigned to the Department of Academic Success. When you look at the college and career readiness college and career technical educational specialist, we're pushing that work right where that work needs to be, not a CTE district position, but providing additional access to students to maximize the programming at school sites led by the principal. We as a system or as a district can't be a crutch for principals. We need to ensure that we're supporting their vision, providing them with the on-site support needed to create programming that meets the needs of their very specific students. It creates a divide, and the organization isn't efficient when a bunch of people are coming into your public school system or your school saying, do this, do that, do something else. We need to ensure that we're supporting the principals in the implementation of their specific visions. This drastically enhances the authority that they have with the needed systems of support to build meaningful CTE programs at their Pacific schools, as well as provide additional college and technical support for our students. So we're excited about providing that. As I mentioned, under the, creating the, a position of Department of Instructional Innovation, some modifications and changes to that specific area of work. That position began the first steps of creating the after-school programming, and we've done great work there. But as I began this conversation, there's a number of opportunities to take that to the next level. It has become its own body of work to continue to grow if we're going to continue to offset the impacts of COVID and be that literacy capital of America. We need to maximize every minute that we have. This frees up additional burdens by other staff members so they can take a deeper focus within their specific areas while at the same time growing those wraparound services and extended learning opportunities. So we're excited to be able to provide that position. In the Department of Extended Learning Services, the alignment with the strategic plan, that was the coordinator position that I just spoke about. Sorry about that. Looking at student services, Ms. Dampierre's office. Currently, we have 22 health assistants that are provided in each of our schools. 17 of them are registered nurses or licensed LPN. We want 22. We need to continue to grow that we have the appropriately staffed schools. When you look at RPNs or LPNs, we do have 3 positions that are retiring this year, natural separations. We will replace them only with RNs or LPNs. And over the course of the next 3 years, we will ensure through natural separations or retirements that we will be able to have all RNs or LPNs in our specific schools. And I think that's just the right move, given the reality in which we specifically stand or live in now. We want qualified individuals to be nurturing and caring for our kids when they go into the clinics at our schools. We've done an absolutely outstanding job in creating dashboards to allow principals to access all of the data in one specific size, one specific site, house that information together, be able to manipulate that data. I've said it all the time, data is our superpower. Power BI is the tool that we use. Now we need to provide the additional training that is needed, really to dig deep to ensure every single person who has access to those dashboards has a deep understanding on how to quickly navigate them to accelerate the decisions that they're making to drastically improve the quality of instruction. Having the tool is one thing, mission accomplished. Having the dashboards available, mission accomplished. Initially training principals and school site leaders on how to use them. We've made drastic strides. But students who are in classrooms now need to ensure that their instructional leaders, their teachers have a deep understanding of understanding how that instruction was powerful in the classroom, and that data provides that information for them to make any shifts or modifications to that instruction. So we're looking forward to adding those specific positions. That is the major shifts within the organization. As I mentioned, 2% cost savings to the district. Also asked staff to go through their specific district site positions and looking at job descriptions. And as you'll see, there are a couple of positions that were being modified with no additional salary increase, and there are positions in which assignments or responsibilities are being shifted or modified, which do result in a salary shift or a pay grade change of assignment. These have been appropriately shared with the associated unions and agreed upon, and we think this is the right sizing of responsibilities from a district perspective in order to ensure as we move into the next school year, we have appropriately designed our district to meet the needs of a post-pandemic educational environment that allows us to be extremely nimble, be responsive to the needs of our specific community, while at the same time being fiscally responsible for the funds that we have, maximizing the use of those funds, while at the same time maximizing student outcomes. Thank you.
That's a lot.
I was short.
Take a breath.
I was trying to get on time.
Mrs. Rosario.
Yet another wonderful opportunity to share with the public at our board meeting the plans and the vision that you have in terms of reorganization. I do have a couple of questions, and I have one I'm going to start with this one thing that I don't like. I don't like the title of the position, preparing, advising to higher education path advisor. It's a job description that I think the title is way too long. Why not just call it path advisor?
Well, that's what it is. It's teacher path, that's what they're gonna
But the
have.
job description on here is like a full sentence.
What it means, but we can add the dash path, which is how we are already referring to it. The path.
So can we just change it on
Yeah,
here?
that's easy.
To just say
Yeah.
path advisor?
Well, I
Make
would
it
keep the
simple?
whole name, just so,
You
you
can
know.
put
and-
that in the goal. The goal is to prepare advising to higher education.
I would put the title, what it means, and just in parentheses, put path, just so there's complete
Well, there,
trans.
you already have that.
That's the, yeah, okay.
I'm just saying, just make the title path advisor and take all that other stuff and put it in the school goal.
Could we let the superintendent
Yeah, that should be his
Does-
decision.
we
design his
are-
jobs that,
We are, and board members can have input.
to
And
the
we
degree
have
we're
an
not
opportunity-
micromanaging him? And
If it
This
says-
isn't
if it-
micromanaging.
If it says path in the job
This
description.
is not micromanaging.
Whatever,
Mayor Bray.
then what it means, and then in parentheses, path, which is, Ms. Dampier, is that how it is? Okay.
What was that? I'm sorry.
He asked if I had put path, what it is, and then put path in parentheses on the job.
Which is what it is right now.
Right, that's what I was gonna change, but if it already says that, then I think I'm good.
So yes?
Yes.
Okay. And then I have another question about, with regard to the equity position. I know that you and I have had several conversations about the work of equity and how you have dispersed the work and the responsibilities amongst your cabinet level, amongst district leadership, that everybody should have work in this area. So can you talk a little bit about your interest in keeping it that way, or your interest in eliminating the burden, or not the burden, the responsibility of equity of some of district leadership, and instead, all of that work is going to fall on the equity coordinator? How is that going to work?
The responsibilities of equity is 100% everyone's within their specific area of work. We all need to be looking at it in terms of, am I providing the appropriate resources within my area of responsibility to maximize the support for children who need that additional support. I think that is everyone's responsibility. There is a significant amount of work, as you referenced. There is the African American Achievement Plan. There is the Equity State Report that has to be created. We do a number of, community outreach in a specific area. So there's coordination of those resources in which we need to drastically enhance and take burdens off other areas that's currently doing that. So it is the management of the specific work, ensuring that it is being done across the organization. It is the opportunity to bring through what will be Mr. Seymour's office that to my attention where we may be falling on transportation. We may be falling on student activities or enrollment. Someone to keep a deep understanding, their finger on the pulse in regards to what's happening across the entire organization.
Thank you.
One of the benefits of spreading it across is that basically everybody's in. You can't, everybody's got a role to play, and it starts at the top, and you set the example, and then your cabinet, and it just flows down from there. The more people you have involved, the more the odds of success are. I think what you've done is terrific.
Dr. Schiff wanted something now.
I'm sorry.
A couple of real quick things. We've shifted a bit how we do things. Bringing the organization chart is not specifically about designing the budget, but they're interrelated. So my question is, one of the things that's come up in the past is having a specific position for grant writing. we miss a lot of opportunities because we don't have somebody who's specifically dedicated to that. Where does that fall in district responsibility?
Through innovation, and I think that's a perfect example. So innovation, and Ms. Emerson well hit her target for this annual year, which I believe was $2 million. So we're on target to hit that specific annual target as it relates to grants. So the redistribution of some of those responsibilities, which is a big lift, the extended learning opportunities, the after-school summer programming, that allows more intentionality of working with that. So I did, just to be completely transparent, problem solve around a very specific grant writer. I think we have that skill set in the building, and we'll continue to set very, very high targets to ensure that we maximize those specific resources.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen in the past is that there are opportunities that neighboring counties are picking up on or getting through grant writing that we're not. So I can see where you're paying attention to that and finding ways that we can also maximize it, but that
Well,
is such an important part of what we need to attend to as well.
Another area in which I struggled for as I came in, we're looking for grants. Oh, let's write this grant, or let's write that grant, versus saying, this is what's defined within our strategic plan, this is the needs in our specific schools, let's go look for very specific funding sources. So without a strategic plan, without clearly defined concepts at schools, without the staff being designed in a way, we have all these one-offs. They're creating additional work that, I think I'm like, we're forcing principals to do things. They're like, that's not what I want to do. So now that we have that structure in place and the work now is evenly distributed around the work of innovation, I think we're going to be able to really begin to accelerate that and pull principals in, pull district staff in, and use their areas of expertise with the shell or the structure that a grant writer would be able to provide. So I think we'll be there when we're supposed to be there, and I think we're almost there.
And just because you happen to mention around food services and health and nutrition, are we, and this popped into my head but may not be relevant to this specific conversation, so maybe better another time. But are we taking advantage of like local resources, local growers, state-driven food opportunities, agricultural opportunities to enhance the quality of our food?
I'll let Mr. Bass answer the question, but I have never seen so much fresh vegetables and fruits in a cafeteria since I've been in this system. I think some of the things that we're doing in our cafeterias, who our cafeteria managers are, they're a really, really fun group of people who really take a great sense of pride in their work. And when you see some of the quality and presentation, I think if we're marketing it and we're celebrating it and getting kids excited about what's going through the line on Thursday and Friday, we never hear any of that. With all the social media that we do, if we could push that out, I would love, hey, Mom, it's Taco Tuesday.
Yeah, Chicken Nugget
It is
Wednesday.
Taco Tuesday. But those kinds of things, we have to think from a business perspective while at the same time giving kids great food to eat.
Through the chair, we are participating in ways to get food in. The Farm to Fresh, I believe that's the name of it. It's been a while since I've really.
State, are you talking about the state initiative?
It's the state initiative, yes. It's been a while since I've dove this deep into the food service, but we're taking advantage of that. And then also USDA commodities. That's the discussion that Ms. Simonton and I had when I first came on board, because at the time we had built up a good fund balance. And then if you recall, we paid staff during COVID and to keep them whole. And so we ran up a pretty big deficit that we had to cover our general fund. Through USDA using those commodities this year, we were able to get that debt paid back and then build up a decent fund balance for the rest of this year. So yes, we are taking advantage of those.
Thank you. And lastly, I don't want to belabor it. We've gone back and forth over equity a lot, and I've expressed my disappointment that shifted around. I understand what you're doing, and I understand building it through everything that we do, which I agree is essential. yeah, I think I'm going to save that for another time. But there's so much we need to do with equity and how we define it, who's included in that, how we shift the idea of what are quote-unquote good words and bad words and what those words actually mean, that I'm looking forward to seeing how we address that in the year to come.
And I think having that sole position to do that will
Right.
allow us to get that done.
Dr. Jones.
Kudos on the assistant superintendent who will be over equity, advocacy, and access. As we all know, equity, many things, Title IX, ESOL, ESE, academic achievement, merit scholars. Very, very important. We are a public school system. And the repurposing of two positions within that area with equity and then engaging the community. They tie together very, very well, and I'm looking forward to that. And I agree with Dr. Schiff. I mean, a lot of things we need to talk about with that. Parents being engaged. Parents are our first, children's first teacher. And as a principal, I loved having parents, and they're just very, very supportive, and I love that we're concentrating there. The CDE, we used to have those positions at schools, and I loved them at the schools, and I'm glad they're going back to the schools because that's the way it should be. Tying in all our after-school programs with the program we run also with Ms. Musselwhite, and fine-tuning that, I think, is just that wraparound is going to be fabulous. And having LPNs and RNs on our campuses would also be wonderful. But I'm always looking at, making sure the schools are the ones having that support or that position there. And I think I said that at one of our first meetings. When we look at the realignment, I'm going to look and see where are we going and are our schools getting the support they need? But I'm very happy with this reorganization. Thank you.
Mrs. Berenborg's very happy, too. Right? Anybody else have any? Mrs. Rosario?
I do actually have a request on the very next available date that we get together and do a board discussion. Maybe that would be another opportunity for you to train board members on the Power BI.
Oh, I
On
love
the
it.
data dashboard and give all of us an opportunity to, because I know that Mrs. Dampier and I have had discussions about that, but it probably wouldn't bear much weight to just do it with myself only when all of us could benefit from that. So,
It's a great idea.
great idea.
It is.
I can tell you on that note, I have had 2 meetings with Dr. McMahon,
I did too. It was great.
and it's amazing.
It's great.
It is absolutely amazing how data can be manipulated, and I say that in a positive sense, and the good that can come from how you look at that information displayed in different ways. It's quite amazing. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, since you were talking about the reorg, kudos, I think you listened. You listened to us, you listened to the community, you listened to the school's needs. So I think that that's the way we need to go, is really looking at what the needs are and really listening to, what's out there. And so I think that's what takes us to the next level, and that's what takes you to be the next level of superintendent, is really understanding the needs of the community you serve. So thank you.
All right, unless somebody has any last-minute ideas, the meeting is officially adjourned at 4:02.